We are recording.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and Happy New Year. I am calling this meeting of the Historic Districts Review Board to order. Today we are January the 11th, 2022. It's our first meeting of 2022, but it's our 37th virtual meeting. Melissa, may we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Chair Rios,
Here.
Vice Chair Katz,
Here.
Member Beachside,
Here.
Member Bienvenue.
Here.
Member Guida,
Here.
Member Larson. I understand she's
She's
excused. And Member Roybal.
Uh,
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Are there any changes to the agenda, either staff or board members? Carly?
Yes, Madam Chair, we would like to move new business, item H. There's only one item there under new business, the Stucco guidelines, under the discussion items, just after I.
Okay. Is that the only change?
That is the only change from us.
Katz
motion?
moves to approve the agenda as amended.
Wait a second.
Roll call vote, please.
Member Beachside,
Yes.
Member Bienvenue,
Yes.
Member Guida,
Yes.
Vice Chair Katz.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. We have minutes of December the 14th, 2021. Board members, are there any, or staff, any changes to any of these? To these minutes? I don't see any
Madam
hands.
Chair,
Yes,
I believe on page 5, the paragraph at the top of the page immediately preceding old business, section G. That paragraph reads, the website has been updated and includes that information. An announcement for the ARC Architectural Review Committee historian is on the website. I believe that should read Archaeological Review Committee.
okay. Any other changes? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of December the 14th.
Katz moves to approve as amended.
Do I hear a second?
Beachside second.
Roll call vote, please.
Member Beachside,
Yes.
Member Bienvenue,
Yes.
Member Guida,
I abstain.
and Vice Chair Katz.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. We have 7 findings of fact and conclusions of law. Any changes to any of these?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Member Katz,
I have changes to number 4 and number 7.
please. state.
Number 4, I would add in the subsection F of 15 of the findings, after the replacement of garage door, I would add in kind with similar window placement. And then I would add in the conclusions of law in 4A, the garage door will be replaced, including the placement of the windows, with in-kind materials as described in the project application. And then on number 7 on Garcia Street, I would amend number 9B to after the accordion style door, I would add and C, the 24-inch deep roofette. And then continue along on the north elevation and then strike out everything on the rest of that line and the next line and on the next line all the way through to inconsistent And then add, are not in harmony with the streetscape and are thereby inconsistent with the historic design standards. So it would read now from the beginning of B, the accordion style door, and C, the 24-inch deep roofette are not in harmony with the streetscape and are thereby inconsistent with the historical design standards. I think a specificity of what standards we're talking about is helpful.
Anything else? Anybody else? It appears not. Is there a motion to approve these as just amended?
Beachside so moves.
Cat
Is there a
second.
Roll call vote, please.
Member Beachside,
Yes.
Member Bienvenue,
Yes.
Member Guida,
Abstain?
Vice Chair Katz.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you very much. We go to matters from the public. Let me see if I see any hands from anybody from the public wanting to speak. We have Stephanie Beninato has her hand raised. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, how are you all? Happy New Year.
Same to you. Yes,
I'm just wondering on these guidelines, I know on the Stucco guidelines, is that also people can make comments on that because you moved it to a discussion item? My question. And then also on the informal reports on other design items. There is nothing online, so I'm wondering, when there would be something and if, again, public gets to comment or not on those kinds of things. So thank you.
you're welcome. And yes, I will allow comments. I think it's important that we have public input. And so we will have comments both, of course, under new business, we always allow that. And then under discussion items, we will also allow that. I will also call for public comment. And I forgot what her second question was.
Oh, it was about the other informal presentations that are happening tonight where there is really nothing online to look at. And wondering about what the process was for that one. And I do appreciate that you're going to allow public comment on the Stucco part. Thank you.
Stephanie, we will all see how that's going to work out at the same time that you see it or that we learn about it. You will be learning about it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. So let me see, and I don't see any other hands up. So let me see where we go from here. We will go to staff communications. Do we have anything under staff communications?
Yes, Madam Chair. I have a few items and then I think Frank also has a few items.
Thank you.
So I'll go ahead and get started. Just a note on the pandemic. I think we are no different than anyone else. Just a statement to the public. Be patient with us. We are impacted just as everyone else is. I myself have a child out of daycare right now, and while we do have most of our staff we are less impacted than many folks, we still are seeing those impacts. So that said, I wanted just to make it clear what we consider emergencies as well, because that did come up as there have been some questions just about that generally. And those are things that have to do with life safety impacts, leaking roofs. We had a moldy roof in the fall. Anything that impacts a gas line, sewer main breaks, things like that. So we do prioritize those emergencies above all else. I just wanted to make that very clear. Then another note that we have is the ARC historian posting is still open. We're waiting to get enough applicants. We've already got a couple so far, but we're hoping to get just a handful of applicants in order to then push some names forward. So if you know anyone who's interested, please direct them to the posting on the website or send them to me. As stated, just right before we started recording, we have an HDRB member who has resigned, and we will be accepting, I just wanted to say we appreciate Buddy Roybal's service to the city. We are grateful for the members' commitment on the board. With that said, unfortunately, we will be accepting resumes and letters of interest going forward. Those can be directed to me, emailed to me. So if you know of those who are interested, please send them my way.
Charlie, on that, Buddy was occupying the seat that by ordinance is for someone who's in the construction. And so I assume that we need somebody to fill that role.
That is correct. Thank you. So yes, he represents the construction industry. So it will be specifically for that seat. And then Frank, Frank R., you had an additional piece of information that they do have to reside within the city. Not just have an office. That was clarified today. Frank, can you confirm that for me?
Yes, I'm looking at code section 14-2.8 regarding additional procedures of land use boards, subsection capital B. Okay, the following procedures apply to each of the land use boards and their standing subcommittees, except the governing body. Under another section of the code, the Historic Districts Review Board is a land use board. Subsection B, residency. Subsection 2, a member of a land use board whose jurisdiction does not extend to the presumptive city limits shall reside within the city limits. So Historic District Review Board represents or deals with specific areas within the city, does not extend to the presumptive city limits, and that member does have to reside within the city limits. And then I also double checked the composition of the Historic Districts Review Board. I'm looking at code section 14-2.6. Membership and procedure is 1, composition. HDRB consists of 7 members who have demonstrated interest and knowledge of the historic character of the city. 1 architect, 1 historian. 1 member shall represent some aspect of the construction industry. 1 member shall have a business in the historic district, 1 member of the Old Santa Fe Association, 2 members at large. So if he represented some aspect of the construction industry, we would have to replace him with somebody who represents some aspect of the construction industry. That's my reading of it.
Thank you, Frank. I do publicly want to thank Buddy for his service. I don't know exactly how many years he served, but he served a number of years, and you all, the public knows that this is all voluntary. So we are all volunteers, and I want to thank Buddy for his service. Also, Frank, under staff communications, can you indicate to us any cases that are on appeal and give us the status of those? And I would also like to say, from now on in, can you let us know when a case is appealed and its status?
Yes, whenever we have staff communications, I make it a point to let you know what's on appeal and what the status of that appeal is. With respect, there had been an appeal filed with respect to the project 1023 East Alameda Street. And we believe that the neighbors who appealed the board's approval of that project have reached an agreement with the architect and the property owners, essentially to sheath the exposed steel I-beams framing the portal and providing vertical support to the edge of the portal in wood sheathing. That sheathing will be actual wood, not a manufactured material such as MDF. The last we heard from the neighbors is that they were withdrawing their appeal in that matter. And also there was an appeal filed with respect to the approval of the board for the cell tower on the St. John College campus at 1160 Camino de Cruz Blanca. The appeal was filed with the district court, so this appeal will be pending in the First Judicial District Court here in Santa Fe. Appellants were Stephen Durkovich, Andrew Eisman, Steve Flantz, Joe Sheps, Nancy Zeckendorf, the Upper Camino de Cruz Blanca Road Association, and the Los Miradores Unit Owners Association. The subject of the appeal is the decision of the governing body made on November 10th, 2021, not to hear the appeal, rather to reject the appeal as untimely. And Mr. Durkovich and the other appellants filed something called the motion for emergency injunctive relief. We had a hearing on the motion for emergency injunctive relief that took place on December 16th, 2021. In that hearing, Judge Francis Matthews held that he would not decide the merits of the appeal in a hearing on a motion for emergency injunctive relief. Emergency injunctive relief is essentially an order from a court ordering the city to stop an action or preventing an action from going forward. The appellants wanted a decision on the merits of the appeal in that hearing. The judge indicated he would not decide the merits of the appeal in that hearing. He had not reviewed the record on appeal yet, which was submitted to the court the following week. And we have to go through a briefing schedule per Rule 1-074 of the Rules of Civil Procedure applicable to the district court. Mr. Durkovich's appeal is due, I believe, next week. His appeal brief is due next week. My appeal brief will be due a month after that. However, the judge indicated that since one of the remedies sought under the Historic Districts Code in an appeal is a stay of any building permits that have been issued, the judge said that if no building permit had been issued for the cell tower on the St. John's College campus, that would be enjoined or stayed. I checked with the staff about that. No building permit has been issued, and it may be some time before the building permit will be issued because the applicant, the cell tower company, is working up a memorandum of understanding pursuant to Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, and is working with the state historic preservation officer on that. And Carly, correct me if I misstated that, but there has not been a permit issued, and it's unlikely that they will seek a permit for a couple of months until that memorandum of understanding process is completed.
That's correct, and it likely will be longer. than a couple of months with the knowing how long a memorandum like that can take. It will likely be longer.
Thank you, Attorney Rubalid, for these updates. Appreciate it. And
Welcome.
to a lot of details. So thank you. I think everybody understood what you were talking about. Next, we go under old business. And we- Yes.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I've got one more.
Oh, yes, please.
And in case there are questions so on the sign enforcement update, there have been just a few questions from the public via email to our staff. And so I wanted to give another update here. We have, in the last couple months, we have had 17 warnings issued, mostly in the downtown area for signs, because that has not been enforced in quite some, or not been, the directive has not been to actively enforce certain signs in the downtown area for a while. That is changing. And so rather than start active enforcement before Christmas, we decided to go ahead and go mid-January because that seems more appropriate. Our inspector, Gary Mokino, is here tonight in case we have any questions. But January 17th, sign enforcement will pick up quite a bit. So that's stated publicly.
Thank you. Anything else, Carly?
That is all.
Okay, board members, do you have any questions for Gary Mokino, our enforcement officer? It appears not, and so we will move on to old business. And I do have to tell you, we have two cases under old business, and per usual, if you disagree with the decision that this board renders this evening, you do have the option to appeal to the city council. You have to do it within 15 days after the findings and conclusions have been approved. And you can talk to staff and they'll guide you through the process. With that being said, we'll go to the first case, which is Angela's case. That's 2021-004529, located at 553 West San Francisco Street. And this is in the West Side Guadalupe Historic District. Angela, would you talk to us and let us know about this case?
Excuse me, I'm going to share my screen. It needs to be enabled.
And you should be good to share.
Okay, everyone can see my screen. Okay. This case, 2022-004530 is, I'm sorry, I've just put up the wrong PowerPoint. Okay, here we are. This case is for 553 West San Francisco in the West Side Guadalupe Historic District.
Angela, pardon me, but we're still seeing 115 Camino Escondido.
Oh, you
on the
are?
screen. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
I have to stop, I guess. Stop sharing that one.
Angela, I stopped the share, so you should be able to restart sharing.
I'm sorry, I can't seem to find the share screen button on my Zoom.
Carly, are you able to help her?
So Angela, it's at the, so hover over the bottom of the Zoom screen. You should see the green up arrow.
I think I have two Zoom screens open. Let's try this. Oh. Okay, I think I found it. Okay. All right. Can you see?
Now
the
you've
case
got
for
it.
553 West San Francisco? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Which is in the, the West Side Guadalupe Historic District. This house is a non-contributing Spanish Pueblo revival style building. And that's a picture inside the courtyard. The west elevation. And this is a picture from the street looking at the east elevation. That's how it appears now. This is parking here. The applicant proposes to add, this is the existing site plan. This is the existing house. And that's the existing floor plan as well. This is the proposed floor plan. This is the existing mass, and this is the addition on this side. The applicant proposes a 500 square feet addition to its north elevation. Its height is 14 feet 4 inches, which is about 2 feet above the existing building and within the maximum allowable height in the streetscape. The addition on its west elevation okay, the existing west elevation, the side of the house is this. This is the proposed west elevation. The addition will have 3 sets of divided light windows with territorial style wooden pediments, and they also have transoms. A new divided light wood door and small divided light window will be surrounded by a 1.5 inch brick mold and a concrete sloping sill added to the south, to the south of the window. This is the creation of a new house entry. An outdoor fireplace is proposed for the exterior southwest corner of the building. I'll show that in another elevation. The east elevation features 2 of the same double windows. So this is the other side that you saw. This is the driveways here, goes to the back of the property. To the north is the addition. This is the proposed addition's east elevation. There's the fireplace. And these are the 2 windows with divided lights and transoms. In between the windows and below the windows is a proposed wooden panel feature as well. This small divided light window has a wood shutter. The applicant proposes to add an entry gate. Sorry. On the south elevation, front of the house. The existing house, west elevation is this, the front of the house, and the applicant behind the yard wall is proposed. This is proposed behind the yard wall, which is a new portal and a new gate. The new entry gate will be wooden, flanked by pilasters and a carved wooden overhang. This is the proposed new yard wall, gate, and the overhang, which is at the same height of the existing portal. The gate entrance leads to a path to the new house entry on the next elevation. The applicant also proposes to add 2 new wooden gates to this east elevation. Stucco will be always cottonwood, and the house's color palette includes whites under portal and for windows and door pediments, black sable for windows and door trim, and soft browns for the corbels and the beams. Here's the palette. And the proposed light fixtures are these blue goosenecks. And with that, I recommend approval because it meets the design standards for the historic districts and height and the West Side Guadalupe Historic District, 14-5.21. And recommend approval with the condition that all light fixtures are compliant with New Mexico's night sky law. The applicant is going to present his proposal after me. So if there's any questions, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Angela. For clarification purposes, the 500 square foot addition on the north side, did you indicate it's going up to 14 feet 4 inches?
Yes.
And so the existing house is now 12 feet, approximately 12 feet 4 inches. Is that correct? Because the addition is going up by 2 feet.
Yes.
And do you know the interior ceiling height of the proposed addition?
I do not.
Okay, I will ask that of the applicant.
Okay.
Also, there is presently 3 of us were on the field trip today, Frank Katz and John Benvenue and myself. And I noticed there is a coyote fence right there in front of the entrance to what is the existing house now. Is that
Mhm.
coyote fence is that remaining or is that going to go away?
That is, I believe that's remaining.
Okay,
But
I'll ask the
get
applicant.
clarification from the applicant if it's being replaced.
Yeah, I'll ask the applicant that as well. And can you also indicate to us what the public visibility is of the proposed addition?
It's in the back of the existing building and is not publicly visible other than its height above the existing building.
Okay.
If I may add to that, it might be publicly, its east facade elevation would be visible at an angle from the street looking north.
And what is being shown here on the alteration to the wall, that is the wall that is at the street, correct? And then they're going to add these gates so that they have a new entryway. If you're not quite sure, I can ask the applicant.
Wall at the street, this is an
Verify.
interior courtyard wall. New wall, but not at the street, the existing wall.
Okay, we have, thank you. Other board members, Vice Chair Katz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I too am puzzled by this elevation we're looking at. Is that the street one or the other one? I think it may be where the fence is, but it's unclear to us. I have a question too. I noticed that the house was built in the 40s, and has there been a status review of this?
Not since the GIS map for the city was created, and it's non-contributing on that map.
Would that be appropriate before we rule on a major change to the structure? I mean, that review was, obviously not a very thorough review, and it was also quite a while back.
So much has been altered. This and another house right next to it were twin houses, and there's an easement, and they've both been significantly altered to the degree that there's no chance in my mind that it would be contributing. However, for the record and revisiting the status to establish it as non-contributing is possible.
Well, it's just, I don't think we've seen anything that shows us the changes, and so it's kind of hard for us to evaluate what those were and how much they changed the structure. Is there did I miss something in the packet? It's possible I did.
No, you did not.
Well, I'd be curious what the other board members think about whether, when you're making a major change to a house, whether there should be an evaluation of the status. The other question I have is the wood siding between the two windows on the new east facade in the back. Is that something that is appropriate style for this district?
Chair or Member Katz, Vice Chair Katz, that is something that the applicant has added to the design, and in the West Side Guadalupe Historic District, the design standards are a lot looser, and he can speak to that as he presents his case.
But I assume that you would make an evaluation when you make a recommendation as to whether it meets the standards, and I was wondering if you had.
I found that it meets the standards loosely.
Was there a
given the-
particular reference to that?
No.
Thank you. That's all. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Member Beachside?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I share Member Katz's concerns about the status. And I would be interested to know more about the history of this property, since it hasn't been evaluated recently and it qualifies on the basis of age. I had the same question about the wood siding. I would like to know if there's other examples of this in the streetscape, in addition to the wood shutters that are proposed for the windows. I think it's, a nice design, but I'm not sure if those elements exist in the streetscape. The other question I had, I think it probably is better addressed to the applicant, is about the height of the existing structure. It might just be the perspective of the renderings that were provided, but the new addition looks much taller than 2 feet in those, 2 feet taller than the existing in those. And then I think Angela mentioned that she thought the existing structure was the same height as the new arch over the gate, which is 8 feet 8 inches. So the applicant could clarify that when they speak, that'd be great. And my final question is for staff on the color of the stucco that's proposed, which is cottonwood. And in the recent past, that has been allowed. In the distant past, that was not allowed. And I notice it's addressed in the discussion item we have coming up. So if there's an opinion to offer on that, I'd be interested to know what our current point of view is on cottonwood.
I would like to know as well, as this is the first case I've had with this stucco proposed. Again, it has to do with it being in the West Side Guadalupe Historic District, not in the downtown and East Side Historic District. But I think pursuant to the discussion we'll have tonight, we'll have more clarity on what that means for this color stucco on this project and going forward.
Anything further, Member Beachside?
No, thank you.
Can you describe for us the color cottonwood, Angela?
Chair Rios, it looks to be a light, almost a light gray tan. And I would like to refer all these questions going forward to the applicant because he has an in-depth presentation for you and is the designer of all of these features.
Okay, thank you. Member Benvenue?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Also, Angela, on the color, I'm wondering about the black trim on the doors and the windows, particularly as against the colonial white stucco under the portal. Is that something that seems consistent to you with the streetscape?
It's consistent with, well, I will say that I have not seen very many black trim windows, and white under the portal does appear throughout the district and isn't prohibited.
Right.
I'm not aware that black is prohibited. I know I have not seen a lot of it.
Yeah, I don't know that it's prohibited. I'm just wondering more if it's harmonious. I haven't seen that, but particularly with the really stark contrast with the white, which I agree is probably allowed under the portal, but it makes the black trim even more of a stark contrast. Thank you.
Thank you. Angela, who is the applicant in this case?
Stephen Perfetto?
Okay, and is he with us? Stephen Perfetto? I do not see him. Let's see. Let me look.
Could also be Claude Embolt, the other owner. And Jutan is the architect.
Okay, Jutan is there. Let's see. Okay, Stephen Perfetto has his hand up. And so Mr. Perfetto, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. You and anyone else that is speaking regarding this project needs to get sworn in by Melissa. So Melissa, would you get Mr. Perfetto sworn in?
Yes. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Stephen Perfetto, 4075B, 19th Street, San Francisco, California, 94114.
Okay, thank you.
And I am a co-applicant with my husband, who is Claude Imbo, and he is here as well. So we probably should go ahead and swear him in.
Okay.
Hello, this is Claude Imbo, and my address is 4075 Unit B, 19th Street, San Francisco, 94114.
Okay, I'm going to swear you in. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And is Jutan, is he the architect?
Yes.
And I think that he needs to get sworn in.
Okay. Is he on?
I see his name, but let me see. Mr. Tan, can you hear me? Uh-oh, there's a glitch there. It didn't come in very clearly.
Yeah.
Well, in the meantime, we can swear him in a little while. Let's start with Mr. Perfetto. Mr. Tan, if you can hear me, you were not coming in very clearly. You were very jumbled. And so if you can clear that on your end, then we can swear you in another while. So, Mr. Perfetto, you have the floor, and if you will address, you probably heard the different concerns of board members, starting with the status. I don't know if you know the history of this home.
Yes, actually, we are happy to share all the information that we have for you. We can demystify quite a lot because I'm sure as you're looking at things, that things are a bit confused right now. So we're happy to do that. I want to turn the floor to Claude really quick for a quick introduction.
This is Claude Umbo. Thank you, Madam Chair and the board for reviewing and considering our proposed project for your approval. Stephen, who is my husband, and I wanted to just use our time to briefly give you some context about us and the purpose of our project. We are part-time residents in Santa Fe. We're there about 4 times a year, though our primary residence is in San Francisco. And I oversee public realm projects for a property-based assessment district covering 43 blocks of San Francisco's historic financial district. And Stephen is creative director of a national brand name in the home furnishings industry. We purchased our property in 2017 as our, quote, stake in the ground, as we like to call it. It's essentially our future retirement home in Santa Fe. And we chose to purchase in the historic district because we love the architectural character of the Westside Guadalupe Historic District and its compact, walkable environment. Ju Tan, who is our architect, Stephen and I worked collaboratively on the project's design, which you have before you. And we're transforming the existing 520 square foot casita into a home with a new entry. It's a 1-bedroom, 2 3/4 baths, and adding a 500 square foot addition consisting of a living room and eating kitchen, which is represented on the floor plans you have. We did design the addition from the inside out, and the resulting exterior architectural expression really derives from that approach. We've included divided light French doors and windows with transoms, as was called out, territorial style trim, picket fences, and blue accents on the addition. And all are inspired by elements found on historic buildings existing already on West San Francisco Street. And we believe them to be compatible in creating a harmonious look and feel within that historic district. So we're excited about being part of this historic district community and starting this chapter of our lives in Santa Fe. And thank you for your consideration. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen to give you a few more details to your questions.
Hi there. So to give you just a little bit of history that we know about the property. As Claude said, we purchased the property in 2017 on foreclosure, and it had been maybe unlived in for quite a few years at that time. The information that we have that was handed to us anecdotally was that the house as you see it was remodeled post 2000 and sometime before 2012 is what we can gather. There is only one image that we've ever seen of the property in its former state, and that was from the 80s. I can't remember exactly what county office we were in and saw that black and white picture, but it was a brick house with a metal porch and wrought iron railings was the house was what the house looked like up until that sort of 2000 time. So everything that you're currently looking at, while very authentic to historic styles, is all since 2000. So as far as, I think that answers, or hopefully that answers the historic questions. Are there any others I could maybe?
Yes. What is the present interior ceiling heights of the existing building and of the proposed building?
So the interior of the proposed is at 11 feet. And the interior, it slopes and it goes from about 8 feet to 9 feet in the existing structure. So the purpose for trying to go taller with the new structure was to create a bit of an airiness, a lightness. We wanted to have French doors with transom windows, therefore demanding a certain kind of height. The square footage is so small. The house it's a casita. It's 530 square feet with an addition of 500. So we're just trying to give ourselves a little bit more kind of breathing room.
Yeah, and could you indicate to us, you just told us what the new space is going to be used for?
So the new space consists of a living room and a eat-in kitchen. So the living room is focused on a seat grouping around the fireplace, and it is a kitchen with a table in the middle. The existing house will become the bedroom, 2 bathrooms, 2 3/4 bathrooms. There's currently 1 bathroom. The current kitchen will be transformed into a bathroom, and the current bedroom will be transformed into the entry of the house. And laundry as well.
Okay. And the new entry to the house will be on the west side. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And could you talk to us about the existing coyote fence? Is that going to continue, or is that going to go away?
No, that will be going away. There were questions and some confusion about that. So when you were there today, you noticed there is a wall at the sidewalk.
Right.
That will maintain. Then the current coyote fence will be removed, and what will replace it will be a 4-foot high wall. If you could go to that elevation, Angela, so we could look at it. Will be a 4-foot high wall. Okay, we thought to go ahead and open that up so that you're able to, from the street level, see more of the character of the house. We never liked the coyote fence. It's way too tall. It covers up the architecture. It was never a feature that we really liked about the project, about the house. So taking that down is an important thing for us. Reorienting the entry kind of makes us reorient then the entry from the parking spaces, and that's why you have the design of this gate, which will give you access directly from the parking area, a straight shot down the side of the house into the new entry.
And you are not planning a vehicular gate, correct, at the street?
No, that is not in the plan.
Okay.
Angela, if I may interrupt, Chair Rios. Angela, could you just show us the proposed plan? A lot of the stuff that we're talking about would be a lot clearer.
The floor
That is
plan.
Member Guida.
Is that what
The slide before the one you're on right now.
floor plan?
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. I'm going to give you what you need.
Are you wanting to see an elevation, Member Guida, or are you wanting to see the floor?
No,
plan?
I'm clear on what's being proposed because I looked at the packet. We're not showing the public the essential details here. So the plan is the thing that which shows most of the things that we've been talking about.
I would like to also add that I did do the colored illustrations. You can see 2 of them on that last page. I've done colored illustrations for all of the 4 sides. I don't know why they're not in the presentation, but if you're interested in seeing them all, I can flash through them. I believe they were in the packet though, but I'm happy to show them if you'd like to look at them. They might demystify a little bit more as
I
well.
could probably pull them up. I was under the impression that you all were presenting that, so apologies for that misunderstanding.
Okay.
That you were doing a slideshow. So let me find.
Okay, in the
those.
meantime, you indicated there were blue accents. Can you be more specific on that?
Yes, so I'd like to address the color questions that came up. The blue is one of them. So we are proposing that the entry door and surround are blue, and that will show up in the colored illustration that I have. And under the portal, we're proposing that the new French door and new windows also be in blue. Unfortunately, Sierra Pacific's dark blue color is called black. Black Sable, I think is the name of it. It's an unfortunate name because it actually is dark blue and not black. So to alleviate all your concerns about there being black on the house, there will not be. It's all a dark, it's sort of a navy blue. It's just a little less purpley. It's a little bit more on the green side of blue.
Are you able to see this? I put those color renderings up. Do I need to share that screen?
Yes, you need to switch.
If you
switch the
would,
share.
please. We're still on the
Okay.
floor plan.
New share. Okay. There we are. Okay, can you see those? These are from your packet.
So if you would go to the front, this
Okay.
West San Francisco street elevation. Yeah, so there you can see those are where the blue front door, or sorry, front facing facade windows and doors will have the blue accent. We're also proposing a white stucco under the portal. And then cottonwood as the color for the entire house is the one that we landed on. It is very similar to two other colors that are slightly warmer. I believe one is called Hialeah and maybe one is called Charleston. Don't quote me on that. They're slightly warmer, a little bit less gray. We were trying to color match back to the historic building that is near the Arts High School in the rail yard. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with that, but there is the high school that's there. There are several kind of buildings around that. There is a historic building that's right next to that. I don't know what the current use is, but it may have been a restaurant in a previous world. And we were matching back to the color of that building, which also has white territorial trim and white V-groove. Those white V-groove garage doors were also what had inspired the V-groove gates and the V-groove paneling on the east elevation that you were questioning that is between the windows.
On this elevation that we are seeing, I'm just wondering the back portion that you're proposing. I don't know, that looks so much higher than 2 feet to me. Can you explain that? Is there an error here or what?
I'm looking on the plans right now. Our plans do have the new addition at 14.4. And I'm sorry, I have to admit, I'm not seeing a dimension of the current house on the plan that I'm looking at. Ju, if you're able to jump in and answer that question.
I don't think he's with us.
No, it sounds like you're not able to hear him. I think because this particular elevation, collapses all of those facades down. Remember that the height of that building is halfway back on the property. So while it looks much taller here because it's all getting flattened out, we were hoping that the massing of that didn't feel too high, from the sidewalk or the street view.
Right, that was the point that I was going to make. The building is the proposed 500 square foot addition is a ways back from the street. It's on the north side. And I'm just wondering what the impact of what it would be on the street. It appears that Angela feels that it has no impact. Is that correct, Angela?
I wouldn't say that it has no impact, but I like we just.
Or
discussed,
minimal impact?
Minimal impact. It's further back on that. And I think the draw elevation of this doesn't accurately portray what is being proposed.
Member Katz,
Yeah, I'm having trouble with the height also. What is the relationship between this house and the one immediately to the east?
I want to answer that if I may. It's a twin. Those were twin houses with one easement down the middle. They were exactly the same and they look similar today. They've both been significantly altered, but unfortunately we don't have photographs from that for context.
Because I noticed that, oh, excuse me. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, I just got an answer as a text from our architect Jew. He's texting me as we're talking that the existing house is about 9 feet tall.
So this is like 5 feet taller.
Correct.
Wow. I mean, I noticed that the neighboring house, the twin, does have an addition in the back as you're planning, and it is taller than the front one, but it's about a foot taller. And I thought, well, I don't know, that looks pretty good. And I was understanding that the proposal was that it was going to be 2 feet taller, not 5 feet taller. And I worry about this really just overwhelming it and being too much. Plus, I am, I guess, concerned again about the historic status. I understand that it's now stucco rather than brick, but what else was changed? Is the shape the same? Are the window positions and size and placement the same? And we don't know. And I wonder whether, I mean, I feel uncomfortable making a decision without having a status review. And I'm certainly not happy with the 14.6 or whatever it is foot ceiling in the back.
thank you, Member Katz. Anything further?
No, thank you. No.
Member Guida.
Thank you, Chair Rios. I have a few points to make, and I'll just kind of rattle them off in a row. You know, first of all, I would like to applaud the applicants for the quality of their presentation. We're seeing very clear drawings tonight, both in terms of the architectural drawings, 2D drawings, the plans, site plans, and especially these color renderings, which really do help understand exactly what the colors are, where they're applied, and all of that. I think it's unfortunate that both because of board discussion and maybe also because of this requirement to have staff present the projects, that even though applicants do very well represented projects, they often get short shrift in these presentations, and they're not shown ideally. We're often on the wrong slide. The information for me is there in the packet for this project. And, you know, in the future, I would, you know, advocate for applicants, especially with design know-how, to present their own work for the benefit of the board. It's often much better to have those applicants walk us through the project. That said, you know, everything that I'm seeing in the packet seems to be great. I think this is a really well-conceived project in terms of how it responds to a historic context, a historic building in terms of preserving, even though it's a non-contributing structure, and I would support maintaining this as a non-contributing structure in terms of how it treats it and leaves it alone for the most part, and then does a new and contemporary edition of its time, set back from the street, articulated from the structure and towards the back. I think the moves on the site are really smart. They give us the project gives us a lot of relief at the front property edge instead of a tall fence. A new wall is set back close to the house, establishing the entry along the side. The elevations here, and particularly this one, is you know, it kind of shows the full height of the addition, but it does so orthographically. So it looks like there's a 5-foot addition right on top of the front wall of the house, but we know that that's just a flat view. In perspective, this would be set way back on the site, as was mentioned earlier. As far as some of the concerns of the board that have been articulated about colors or the wood detailing or even the height and form of this building, I would say that this building, is in scale with the front house. Scale is more than just height, as we talk about again and again. This is a 500 square foot addition to a 500 square foot house. It's being done in a sensitive way. As far as harmony goes with this district, I'll make a couple points. This is the West Side Guadalupe district, where we are not held to strict standards about colors and so forth. In fact, we're not even held to the same standards of the buildings being articulated in either a Spanish Pueblo revival style or in a territorial style. In fact, the guidelines that we have in the ordinance articulate that harmony is with this district. It allows unusual things like stone and wood siding in many cases. I would argue that a tall addition on the back of this house is very in keeping with the district. The West Side Guadalupe district is funky. It has a lot of solar additions. It has a lot of tall additions. It has a lot of weird things that were done in the 80s. This is actually none of those things. This is quite conservative in that context. But judging this project as an East Side, as fitting into an East Side context, I think is wrong. I think the board should be looking at this project in the context of this neighborhood and the articulation of the ordinance there. Overall, I think it's a great project. It doesn't overwhelm the site. It doesn't overwhelm the existing dinky little house. It makes a nice project in this district. I support it.
Thank you for your comments, Member Guida. Other board members wanting to comment or ask questions at this time? If not, I will take it to public comment. Let me see, we have 2 people with their hands up. Let me see, oh, more than 2 people. Quinn Simmons or Simons? Are you wishing to comment in reference to this particular case?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
And you need to get sworn in, first of all.
Okay.
Good evening. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Quinn Simons, 286 Los Pinos, Santa Fe, New Mexico, 87507. I am the attorney of record and representative of the neighbors who own the property to the east of the subject application property, Loretta and Mark Romero. I would just have a few comments regarding the impact of the proposed addition on the neighboring property to the east. There was a slide earlier that showed the subdivision, the subdivision plat of the property. I do agree that it was, I think originally they appear to be to have been similar structures on both properties. The property was subdivided and a 10-foot easement was provided between the 2 structures to access parking in the back of 553 West San Francisco Street, the West San Francisco Street residence, and also to provide a parking area at the north end of that easement for 551 West San Francisco Street. That's how the property is currently used. There's probably 3 parking places behind this residence currently. The actual width of this driveway between the 2 structures is probably more like 9.5 feet currently. It's an extremely narrow alleyway that accesses the parking areas behind the 553 West San Francisco Street residence. And my clients are concerned about the impacts of this addition on that existing easement and the access to both of these properties. It appears I had a slide, an earlier slide, where they were the applicants were proposing an entrance on the east side of their addition. It seems that has been since modified to add the main entrance on the west side, which I do think makes more sense. But looking at these slides, the east elevations seem to further encroach on that easement, and the wood siding seems to be a possible concern for my clients, as do the casement windows that open onto that easement. Again, it is a very narrow little alleyway there, and my clients are concerned about the impacts on access to get back there. They're concerned about access for EMS and fire on that existing easement. They have parking concerns, setback concerns, and lighting concerns as well, because the two properties are just so close to each other. It's unclear how the lighting issues might impact the neighboring property as well from the slides proposed by the applicants. Those are really, I think in summation, those are really my client's concerns about the proposed addition and remodel to the subject property.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Simon. Mr. Simon, I have a question for you.
Please.
Do you feel that the proposed addition, is that encroaching? Is that right on the easement? From what I am seeing, it is not, but did you indicate that it is encroaching on the easement?
Madam Chair, it's hard for me to tell. It's hard for me to tell from the slides that I've seen here tonight. I'm flying a little bit blind here, but I can tell you that the existing building is on, not only on the right up against the easement, but right up against the property line as well. There is no setback currently, and it's unclear on that east elevation whether or not, or on the east proposed addition, whether or not they're even getting closer. I don't think they can get any closer to the property line without encroaching on the neighboring property to the east. But even putting casement okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so there's the east elevation there. It appears that there's a build out from that elevation. It appears to me that there's a small wall that's built out.
Okay, we can get a clarification from the applicant in reference to that.
Angela, just show us the existing versus the proposed floor plan. It's in the packet.
Yeah, I think that was the best
existing. That's
view.
proposed.
What I see is a wall in front of, I mean, the
I
new
see.
one is set back, but there's a wall in front of it, and the doors through that wall open up right into the easement.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at as well. And I'm not seeing on that floor plan, I'm not seeing the property line. But I know from the plat that the existing structure is on the property line or very close to it.
Property line is drawn at the bottom of the proposed floor plan. It's the light line just outside the heavy black line of the existing house.
Also, the site plan shows the property line and easement.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. So those doors do open up over the property line.
That appears to be so. And it's at least another 6 inches closer. So I mean, what this doesn't show is the proximity to the property to the east. And as proposed here would decrease the clearance in that little narrow driveway to 9 feet probably.
Okay, let me see. I see that Mr. Perfetto has his hand up and I would like to hear from him.
Very good.
Hi there. Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I'd like to help alleviate some of the confusion around the topics that were brought up. So number one, this is an access and utility easement. It's not a driveway, and it has never been described as a driveway. Now, it was at the time this house, this casita, plus the one to the east of us was one property. Okay, this one property was split down the middle. When it was split down the middle, they decided to put the property line basically about 6 inches, 4 to 6 inches to the east of the actual house, our house. So what you're seeing there is true, that east wall is just a few inches off of the property line. So our addition meets all the guidelines of a 5-foot setback from the property line. And those walls and gates that we're proposing are also going to be built on our property. And the gates are allowable because this is an access and utility easement. Access doesn't mean just cars, but pedestrians as well. So we fully expect to be able to use these gates without impediment by vehicles or other kinds of obstructions that the neighbors might choose to put there. So the Romeros might be confused as to how they're able to actually use that space, but our understanding is that it is a utility and access easement, which means it's meant to be kept clear for us to be able to have access to our property.
Okay, did I understand Mr. Simons to say that there is parking in the back for the Romeros as well? Or was that a misconception on my part?
So that would be a misconception. There is no, what's being addressed is they currently use the very back of that easement as a parking space. It's not meant to be used as a parking space, but because we're able to get to the back of our property currently by driving down the easement and turning left, right? If you were in a vehicle, you could drive down the easement and turn left. You could still park currently 2 cars in the back of our house where we're proposing this addition. And their vehicle would be able to also park back there and turn around, do a K-turn to come back out. So while we understand that there would be concern that they wouldn't be able to park a car back there, but that was never, it's not a driveway and it's not a parking space. It is a utility and access easement.
Okay, so where do they park now? Where do the Romeros park now?
So this is Claude. So what we witness is the Romeros it's currently used as a short-term rental. The Romeros do not live there on property. They're absentee landlords. So, but when they do have tenants, they park in the front driveway on the north elevation, just in front of their house. And
Oh,
then their guests will also use the easement as a parking stall and do a 3-point turn in our backyard to reverse. So that's how they're currently using it.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Madam Chair?
Who is it?
This is Quinn Simons.
Oh, yes, yeah. Please always identify yourselves. And I noticed, board members, that you were all speaking out of turn. I really like to call on you for the record. Okay, yes, Mr. Simons.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I do believe that is right. I mean, it is an access and utility easement. It's a 10-foot wide easement that runs, between the two properties. And it's my understanding that that the parking there is a parking spot in the front of 551 West San Francisco Street, my client's property. There's enough room for one car there, and that the other parking place that to my understanding has historically been used for 551 West San Francisco is at the end of that easement. There's in fact a sign there denoting that as a parking place for 551 West San Francisco Street, and it has traditionally been used as such. I cannot see, I guess I just don't understand from this floor plan exactly the plan for additional parking behind the 553 addition, and how that is how that is anticipated to be handled for another parking place, because currently they have also one parking place in front of the existing structure.
Okay, let me, I noticed that Carly has her hand up. And Carly, are we treading into an area where we should not be treading into the parking?
Yes, ma'am, we definitely are. This is reviewed by current planning.
And that's what, okay.
And they look at parking issues specifically. So this is out of our scope.
Okay, so sorry. So sorry that we took it to that. I know, Mr. Simons, that's what you presented in reference to the easement. And as the conversation went on, I'm thinking in my head, the board does not have purview over planning, over parking, excuse me, and zoning and other city departments will take care of that in the process of permitting. Let me see. I'm going to ask for other people within the public to comment, and that would be Stephanie Benenato. She has, would you swear her in, please?
Yes. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Stephanie Benenato, PO Box 1601, Santa Fe, New Mexico 87504. I agree with some of the height concerns. I think that a 5-foot difference is quite a big difference, and even a 3-foot difference, which would still make it 12 feet. I think, given that it would be setback, would be much more in harmony. I would also say that the paneling, I know, people go, oh, there's paneling there, but they never give actual examples. And I don't think paneling really is typical, even in the Guadalupe west side. I too would like to think that there could be a status review on this property, since it is there and doesn't seem to have had a lot of change other than being stuccoed over. And then there seems to be, I'm not sure if it's just the way it's drawn, but on one of the drawings, the drawing with where you can see it, the height, I think it's south elevation, it looks like there's a skylight to the I guess it would be east, on the first floor. I'm not sure if it's just the drawing or if there is a skylight there. And then the other thing, which I know you don't have any purview over, but I do wonder about lot coverage, because my understanding in this area is that it's quite a lot of open space that's needed. And I just wonder, and I don't think parking's supposed to be part of that. So I just kind of wonder how that really happens on this lot. And again, I know that's not your purview, but I just want to go on record for that.
Thank you, Ms. Beninato. We have John Eddy. Would you swear in Mr. Eddy, please?
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is John Eddy. My address is number 14 Avenida Campo Verde, Santa Fe, 87506.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to say this project strikes me perhaps as a little overambitious for the site. When I look at the height, I wanted to ask a question of staff. They don't have to answer right now, but are there height calculations for this neighborhood? Because I think that probably, maybe that is irrelevant, but it seems to me relevant. I think that a 5-foot increase in the height on this addition really tends to overwhelm the original structure. If you go to the east elevation, if staff could direct us to the east elevation, where you can see the addition joined to the original house. This is kind of an illustration of what I'm saying. If you run a line from the parapet running north onto the line of the new building, you've got these transom windows that are at the same height as the top of the parapet of the original structure. Somehow that's incongruous to me. And that 5 feet of additional height for the ceiling seems to drive that. That doesn't make sense. The other thing, I know that we're talking about lot coverage, which maybe we need to be careful about, but I noticed in looking at the proposed floor plan and comparing that with the site plan, that there's a 5-foot setback line, and the masonry structures which hold the gates on that new addition on the east elevation are built onto that setback. They encroach onto the setback. I don't know if that's relevant in this case, but it is something that I noticed and should probably be addressed by someone. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Let me see. Sorry, Mr. Tan has his hand up, but we couldn't get, let's see, Mr. Tan, can you hear me? Mr. Tan, I guess you wanted to say something, but I don't think you can hear me, and I definitely cannot hear you. So I think that I will go forward with the with Mr. Perfetto, and he's got his hand up too. And sorry, Mr. Tan, but it's already after 7. We have obviously spent a lot of time on this case. Yes, Mr. Perfetto, what did you wish to say?
Yes, Jew is texting me. Just I think he's trying to participate. So he just sent me a text, and he wanted to remind, wanted us to remember, even though parking is not part of what we're talking about here, that there are 2 proposed parking spaces in the front of the house, and confirming with zoning, we've received PZR approval on our parking spaces and on our open space.
Okay, I have a question to ask you. How far back does the proposed addition start from the street? Do you know the answer to that?
Off the top of my head, I do not.
Okay, let me see. I think Mr. Guida has a question or comments. Member Guida?
Yes, thank you. I could hazard a guess that it is about at least 46 feet, probably more, back from the front property line. Curious. And in response to Mr. Eddy's comments, gates and walls are not buildings, and so they're not subject to building setback lines. If it's okay, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to make a motion in this case.
Member Benvenu has something to say. Member Benvenu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just before a motion is made, just a couple comments. First of all, I appreciate the clarification on colors. You know, I did look online at the Sherwin-Williams colors, and it definitely is a bluish tone, despite the name black. So that is very helpful and alleviates my personal concern on the color of the trim. A little concerned still about the color of the stucco, since it looks like that's one of the colors that is that staff is going to suggest should not be approved later in the night on their stucco policy. So I don't know how we address that issue. Perhaps it doesn't personally bother me, this color in this particular district, but I don't want to get sideways with what we're going to be addressing and potentially approving later in the evening. And then finally, I just would like to know from the applicant something I don't often like to ask, which is whether they're willing to consider modifications. But this discussion is leading me to believe that there's a possibility that the application could be denied based on the height. And I'm just wondering if the applicant would consider any reduction in the height of the addition.
Would you answer that, Mr. Perfetto? If you would
Sure.
consider a reduction in the height.
So we might consider a small reduction in the height. The reason for the height was really about trying to accommodate a standard height door with a transom, and then a ceiling architecture, which of course you don't see here and can't tell from what we're doing, but we have a ceiling architecture of lattias and some steel planned that will take up, I think, about 15 to 18 inches from the ceiling, which is 11 feet on the inside of the building, of the addition. And what we were trying to achieve aesthetically was a good amount of clean white wall above the transomed windows and below the ceiling architecture. So that's what one of our aesthetic concerns. Like I said, a spaciousness was another thing that because the space is so small, we're really talking about just over 1,000 square feet here. The sense of openness and lightness on the interior was important to us. And because we were allowed to go to the 14.4, we made the decision to have the top of the parapet go to 14.4. If there is a recommendation on what we can change as far as height goes, we'd be welcome to hear that.
Okay,
Well, I appreciate that clarification. I mean, I'm not myself personally concerned about the height, given its setback and the fact that it is within the height calculations, but it may be something that would be worth considering on the applicant's part in order to gain approval, if that's the holdup. The only other point I wanted to make is that I also was concerned about the historic status, but the only evidence that we have suggests that this was a brick building with metal Portals as a building I could imagine being in that district, and that was the case up until at least 2000. And to me, that would indicate that this has changed so dramatically since then that there's no real possibility, unless those facts are just absolutely incorrect, that the status would be anything but non-contributing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Member Katz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have great trouble with the height in the back, and I appreciate very much that the owners want to have, these doors and the transoms above the doors so they let in lots of light, and yet they're building something that's so much taller than what's there, without any consideration of how that blocks the light from their close neighbor to the east. And I wouldn't be happy with it being 12 feet 4 inches tall. In other words, 2 inches lower than 2 feet lower than what they're doing. But I could go with that, but I can't go with the height that it currently is. Thank you.
Mr. Perfetto, can you go to the 12? You said you could reduce it in a small way, but is 12 feet too much of a reduction for you? Reducing it by 2 feet?
Yes, that's too significant of a reduction.
What would the reduction be?
Well, I would actually remind you that all the houses around us are currently taller than our house. And I guess as an applicant, I'm a little confused as to why 14.4 is appropriate as a guideline for us to work with. But having to reduce the height by that much seems egregious of an ask. So,
And Angela, and 14.4 is allowed. It is the maximum allowable, correct?
Correct. It's
Thank
based
you.
on the average of the applicable structures, buildings in the streetscape.
Thank you. Member Beachside.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to clarify my position for the board. I think what we're objecting to is the disparity in height between the original building and the proposed building. But in thinking about it, I think the applicant is proposing exactly what we would advocate for in preservation. And they're leaving the original house as is. They're not raising the height of that structure, which apparently has quite a low ceiling height and probably does feel quite small and cramped. But to their credit, they're maintaining that for the sake of the streetscape and harmony. And because they appreciate, presumably, the historic nature of that house. The other thing they're doing that I think is quite commendable is removing the tall coyote fence and adding a low wall so that you can actually see that structure. And I wish more applicants would do that. They're also not adding a vehicle gate at the street, which blocks off the view of the house, which is often the case. And I think in looking at the resulting lot coverage, it's very similar to their neighbors. I would say approximately it's 42% according to zoning. And I don't think that overwhelms the lot at all. So I support the project as well.
Thank you for your comments, Member Beachside, and I'm going to take it to Member Guida, who was wanting to make a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In case 2021-004-529 HDRB 553 West San Francisco Street, I move that the board approve the project as submitted, finding that it meets all of the district standards.
Please,
Yes,
Chair,
seconds.
And may we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Member Beachside.
Yes.
Member Bienvenue.
Yes.
Member Guida.
Yes.
Vice Chair Katz.
No.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you very much, and thank you all. Sometimes these cases are very arduous and involved, and I'm going to tell you this board is one that is very thorough, and that's why we took a long time this evening, but we did come to a conclusion. Thank you very much and good luck on your project. Next case is located at 115 Camino Escondido. It's also Angela's case. Angela, may we hear from you, please?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, Miss Angela.
So this is 115 Camino Escondido, which is downtown in the East Side Historic District. It's contributing. It's a Spanish Pueblo revival style and constructed early in the 40s and altered significantly throughout the 50s, or through the 50s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 2000s. This is the view of the approaching courtyard, and this is behind the courtyard wall, and the area of work is circled here in red. This is the front of the house. This is a south elevation, and here's the floor plan. Excuse me, the site plan. Here's the floor plan. This is the area to be worked on. The south courtyard existing has these full length windows, they're even doors. These were, and there's a clerestory up here. This work was done sometime in the 70s and is believed to be, this is not a primary facade. The applicant proposes to remodel the kitchen by replacing its existing full height windows, which are modern undivided light, large casement windows with half height windows. This is the proposed half height windows. And the windows are under a portal. Going to the rear of the house, the north side. This is the existing north elevation. We're talking about this area over here. It currently has this window and this overhang and these two doors. The applicant proposes to bring out the bring out this portion of the wall to be flush with this, so it's one wall, and replace this window with 4 divided light casement windows. That's about a 4 feet extension to make it flush with the existing wall. Like I said, the east window will be removed and the west windows and windows will be replaced with new divided light sliding doors. The stucco will be patched and color coded to match the existing, and the exterior light fixtures will be shielded for night sky, and both decorative metal and ceramic fixtures are proposed. Staff recommends approval and finds that it complies with section 14-5.2D, the general design standards for all H districts, and 14-5.2E, the downtown and east side district standards. And with that, I conclude my report.
Thank you, Angela. So the work that is being proposed is not being done on any primary facades, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Member Beachside.
All right, Madam Chair, that was also my question. What are the primary facades?
Okay. Member Katz.
Well, that's my question too. What are the primary facades? Are there primary facades? Which ones?
Yes, members of the board. The primary facade is the front of the house,
Which is,
okay, let's go here. This is the facade being proposed for alterations. This is the front and the west facade that's considered primary.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mhm.
Okay, and Angela, would you describe where this house is located on Camino Escondido? It's quite a ways from the road.
It is in this vicinity map. This is the river. This is Alameda and Dirt Alameda on the other side of it south. This is Camino Escondido. So it's Canyon Road's way up right here. And so this is towards the river east of Camino Escondido. And it has a long driveway entrance.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And I believe the applicant is Gayla Bechtel, and I see she is there. Gayla, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Would you please swear in Gayla? Melissa?
Yes, yes. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Gayla Bechtel, 320 Aztec Street, Santa Fe, New Mexico, 87501.
Thank you.
Gayla, what do you have to add to what Angela just told us?
I think she did a good job of saying what we're doing. It's a pretty minor project. I don't see my little perspectives that I had provided, where you can really see the difference between the full height windows and the half height windows. We're not touching the portal. We're not touching the primary facade, which we had to get a variance for back in 2005 for the part to the right. So now we're doing the kitchen, but we want to have a countertops against that wall. So that's what we're doing. And reorganize the kitchen so that the outdoor space on the rear, there's a huge, I don't know how old, salt cedar tree that they're hoping to make into a feature back there.
Thank you. Board members, do you have any questions for Gayla? It appears that they do not, so I will take it to public comment. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on this particular project? Stephanie Beninato, you've already been sworn in. What do you have to say?
Thank you. I support the changes that are being recommended. I think it is really far down a driveway that's almost, you can almost not see it at all. From my understanding, it's not on the primary facade, and it's really about making the openings smaller and with material that, well, might be getting close to 50 years old, but will make that room more functional. And so again, I think the proposal should be allowed. Thank you.
Thank you. It appears that no one else from the public wants to comment on this case. Member Guida.
Madam Chair, if you're ready, I'd like to make a motion.
Let's see if Member Benvenue has something further to ask or say.
No, I'm fine with the project and would have made a motion, but I defer.
Okay, Member Guida.
So in case 2021-004-530 HDRB 115 Camino Escondido, I move that the board approve the project as submitted.
And Benvenue seconds.
Roll call vote, please.
Member Beachside.
Yes.
Member Bienvenue.
Yes.
Member Guida.
Yes.
Vice Chair Katz.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. Good luck on your project, Gayla, and good evening. All righty. Well, that was quick. We will take it to discussion items, and I will turn it over to Carly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so this is the fun part. Part of us being a certified local government is that we are to put on informational sessions for the public, educational sessions, things of that nature. So in building the schedule last fall, we decided, okay, let's add a slight bit of room where there typically is a little bit more room in the year so that we can do some of these things. We can align better as staff and the board and the community so that we can start getting information out there for the public on windows, stucco, wall and fence guidelines, things that we need to publish on the website for certain. Okay, so that said, we have been operating with some unofficial stucco guidelines. I wanted to just talk about kind of the role. You have a stucco guidelines for comment. I wanted to talk about the role of guidelines because I think the hope is that we love to get guidelines adopted. Now, we would have liked to have a draft reviewed by the city attorney's office and then the board before this hearing, but we're not as, I was very ambitious. So I think the idea for later in the hearing is that we get comment on those stucco guidelines and later move for, have another, a final draft out there for adoption. That said, I wanted to look at guidelines we've already adopted. So I'm going to share a screen on our, move all my Zoom screens out of the way, our wall and fence guidelines. These were adopted by the board in 1999. The basic breakdown, states our purpose and intent, talks about scale, and it gives, little bits of information about the modulation of coyote fence, that it would be 8 inches. So basically, what we're seeing and the role of these guidelines is they would function as an addition to the code. They should not conflict. And so that's something because our code is rather complicated. And so that was something we have to be very, very careful about. But these wall and fence guidelines can be really helpful in once they're out there and published on the website. They can be helpful to the public so that the public is ready to put forth applications that are already even further tailored before they get to staff. So that's the idea. And then there will be a resource page on the website, added to the website. That's what we'd like to do. So we start putting out what we have and in the mode of transparency. And so that for applicants, it becomes maybe a little bit easier to submit an application. And there are just a little bit less questions as we get more and more information up there. There's been some requests from the community for more transparency and more information. So this, I'll go a little bit further into the wall and fence guidelines, but that's the general idea that we have for tonight. And then the later presentations are those good informational presentations for us, for the community. And so here we go. So here's the wall and fence guidelines, adopted 1999. We state our purpose and intent, which is partially pulled from the code. We talk about scale, which is so important to our streetscape. And this is something that Gary is our inspector is very attuned to because he's well aware of these guidelines and knows them. So when we see straight cuts on coyote fence, where they blend with the streetscape with modularity, that's something that he's looking for too. So this is kind of helps funnel those applications right in that direction. We have a little discussion about setbacks, material, color and texture, and then gates. And then there's just a little suggested options for landscaping. But this covers some information on vehicular gates, but it keeps it a little bit more broad because these guidelines are for the historic districts. So that I think that's something really important to note is our historic districts are all pretty varied. It may be something the board wants to discuss to have specific guidelines for specific districts, but that requires a little bit more study and a little bit more time, but may be worth it. With that said, that was a pretty quick introduction. I will take a few questions. This is meant to be generally pretty quick. And then I have Gary here who is well acquainted with these guidelines, and he can also answer some questions tonight too.
Thank you, Carly. I see that Member Guida already has his hand up. Member Guida.
Thank you, Carly. Thank you for this. I get everything. Were you showing us the wall and fence guidelines as an example of the type of guidance that we're headed towards on Stucco, or are we looking at that particular document tonight?
Yes, it is an example of what the board has passed.
Okay.
And we do have a draft for comment tonight. And so that we've put under new business so we can also get some public comment. It is, I think I put under the initial agenda for adoption, and we're just not there yet. It hasn't been reviewed by the city attorney's office yet. We want to incorporate enough comment and then get a final draft going.
And so right now, the city does not have a similar document on Stucco colors. Is that correct?
We do not.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Other comments at this time in reference to the wall and fence guidelines? I have always felt that a guideline is something obviously that guides you through the process, but it is the question that I would have is how enforceable is it, and do we need to adopt something like this to amend to make it part of the ordinance? I'd like to hear other board members comment in reference to having the guidelines that we presently use as part of the ordinance so that it holds, that it's part of the law, actually. So that it's stronger, or do you feel that having guidelines is, I don't know, to me guidelines are it's like a rule, but is it flexible? What's going on here? So Member Bienvenue, what do you think?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think that we really have an option there because amending the ordinance would be extraordinarily difficult undertaking, I think, at this stage. I think everyone on this board probably agrees that the ordinance needs to be revised and amended. It's a mess, honestly. We all know that, but it hasn't been, despite everyone's knowledge of that, because everyone knows that that's going to just be a very difficult process. And it would certainly need to involve a tremendous amount of public input, in my opinion. So I think that's something that we should all be looking towards and working towards. And hopefully the governing body will direct us to undertake that process at some point. But that's a big undertaking. So I think in the meantime, guidelines are helpful. I find the guidelines on the fences helpful. One question I had, Carly, is whether or not the public has access to that document, because I've looked for it before and not been able to locate it. And it does seem to me it would be important for the public to be able to easily access as well as the board.
So I'll cover a couple there because I want to go back to Chair Rios' point, but no, they don't, is the flat answer. And our website was kind of a tangled knot until rather recently when we reformatted and did the whole new website, and we're still kind of tailoring that. Now there's going to be a resources page. That's the idea that we'll do there. Now I've already tried to upload the historics handbooks from the 1980s, and I've run into a file size limit. So working through that, we may want to renew that. Or I'm just going to find, in the meantime, I'll probably find a way to get that file size way down because it's a scan it's got a lot of information on, and so no, and there used to be pamphlets out, and from my understanding, I was told that there were pamphlets out in City Hall. And so I'm working on first gathering this information, and we have Nicole on contract for a little while longer, and working on renewing that contract. And this is gathering up these resources is one of the tasks, and then posting them on the website, because coming in new, I find that the process of someone who's starting to design and work in this historic district is difficult because there's a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of knowledge by the HDRB, but and other folks throughout the city, but it's not necessarily as available as it could be. Yes. And as far as, I want to go back to the point, Cecilia, sorry, Chair Rios, I'm very sorry. The point about guidelines, I think it's important, and I know Frank R. is going to chime in on this, but the point on guidelines is that what's passed by the board is ultimately what gets inspected based on. But I think the guidelines can be referred to in the decisions the board makes. Frank, do you want to add to that?
No, I just wanted to, I had my hand up for a second, then I took it down because you answered my question. Are these guidelines published anywhere? Because I think, the more information the project applicants have before they come before the board, the more likely we're going to get projects that comply with the historic district design criteria. So, whatever we can do to make the guidelines available, I think it expedite the process, and we'd get more projects compliant with the H district standards.
Yeah, excellent point. That's what I was going to say. Whatever you have available to any applicants is beneficial to them, and it's actually beneficial to us. So when they come before the board, they're better prepared. So whatever, and as long as I've been on the board and as the years have gone by, believe you me, things have improved a great deal. But the more you put on your webpage, I always tell people when they call me, well, you can make sure you look on the website, because there's a lot of valuable information there. And if you don't find something, then call someone within that department and they'll answer your questions. But I do feel that the more information that you put out there, the more helpful it will be. Gary Mokino, good evening. Long time no see. Did you have, and Happy New Year, did you have anything to tell us in reference to guidelines?
In reference to guidelines, not really much, but I think when the board makes a decision on walls and fences, just make sure the conditions are there, because I come across some of them like for the stringers, which side do you want them on? Do you want on the property owner side, or just stuff like that? Colors, heights, and just keep in mind the visibility triangles for walls and the driveways. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Gary. That was helpful. Anything else? Any other comments? I'm going to take it to the public. Let's see if they have anything to say in reference to our guidelines. Stephanie Benenato.
Good evening, Stephanie Benenato. I did look at something online, but I thought it more had to do with stucco. I guess there was a little bit about fences on walls, but it seemed to have to do a lot more with stucco.
We're going to discuss that next. So,
okay, but I'll just say that anything that can be put up on the webpage is always good. And to make it really navigable, like user-friendly, navigable, because I find it very difficult sometimes to find what I'm looking for. I know it's there someplace, but I don't see it. There's no link to it. So the more, the easier and the more interconnected, if you have to go to someplace else to get a form or whatever, I think would be really helpful. Thank you.
okay, thank you. Okay, Carly, next.
Thank you. Next, I'll just throw one last statement in there. Angela drafted those guidelines, those wall and fence guidelines. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mara Saxer, who is our preservation specialist at sorry, I'm going back to my agenda here. Historic Santa Fe Foundation. She has agreed to give us a little informational presentation on stucco, and then another one on windows repair and replacement. And it's going to cover just kind of more of a broad array of things. And I figured we could probably do some Q&A between and give her a little break, if that sounds good. So I'm going to go ahead and promote her to panelist. Okay, Mara, you should be ready to go.
Yes. Hi, thank you, Carly. This is Mara Saxer. Let me just get my screen share ready here. There we go. Can everyone see that?
Yes, ma'am.
So as Carly said, I am the preservation specialist at the Historic Santa Fe Foundation, which for anyone who doesn't know is a local nonprofit, and our mission is to preserve, protect, and promote the historic properties and diverse cultural heritage of the Santa Fe area, and as well as to educate the public about Santa Fe's history and the importance of preservation. And my role at the foundation is to do a combination of hands-on restoration work, particularly on our home property of El Ziguan on Canyon Road, as well as to manage some of our educational programs like workshops and internships, and our preservation easement program. And as one other introductory note, I am not an employee of or officially associated with the City Historic Preservation Division, so I'll make some references to permissibility and code guidelines a little bit, but I will definitely defer to city staff on those things, as I'm ultimately really a member of the public on that note. So going forward, let me make sure my slideshow is actually going to go full screen here. There we go. So most basically, stucco is a finished building material. It's not actually a building type. It's an aggregate, so sand or small pebbles and a binder, which is usually cement and some water. And it's just applied in thin layers over a different construction type. So that might be a wood frame construction, it might be adobe. And part of the reason it's so popular in Santa Fe is that it bears some resemblance to the mud plaster that would have been on the surface of all of the buildings historically. And that makes them fit stylistically with the sort of Santa Fe style and the curated look that was introduced in the early 20th century and that a lot of the stylistic guidelines here in the city are based on. And it's similar in the application to say a mud plaster, but it's more durable, longer lasting. It's not putting like on like as putting mud over adobe would be. And to clarify one other point that I have had many questions on, that stucco and plaster are really the same thing as each other. It's a bit more of a semantic thing than a really material difference. Plaster is usually used to refer to an interior material, which might still be a cement material. And stucco is really just used outdoors on the exterior of a building. And it also is specific to a cement or a synthetic like elastomeric material. Things like lime plaster and adobe plaster are still generally called plaster even when they're on the exterior. And the two types of stucco that I have mentioned briefly, the most common sort of what people traditionally think of when they think of a stucco is a cement material. So these diagrams show the layering process over a wood frame. So some of the base layers might be a little different on something like say adobe. It may not have the plywood, for example, but in general, it'll be a cement material and put over a metal lath that's attached to the surface, and then different layers are added to that. And the only really the final coat will generally be the tinted color that the finish is intended to be. And synthetic stucco works very similarly, but instead of the cement, it will have like an acrylic kind of binder similar to an acrylic paint. And it will have usually some fiberglass mesh as the underlayment as well. And it is more water resistant than the cement in a lot of ways. It's much more plasticky, but that also means that it can be more water retaining if there is water underneath it. So that's a bit of a trade-off between the two materials. And then in terms of texture, it can be applied in all sorts of different ways. And they are called so many different things that I was a little hesitant to even label them on this slide, because I'm sure people have different terms for different things. Often, most simply, it's put on with a trowel and smoothed down. So this fan texture in the middle top here, for example, would be just taking that trowel and forming semicircles with it. Or the top left here would be troweled in kind of a rough texture. A sponge might also be used to apply and then smooth some of the material, as in the bottom left here. And then what was done historically in Santa Fe, especially in the 1920s and 30s, is called most often like a splatter dash texture, where it's actually more flung at the surface than smoothed down. And I will note that texture really can make a big difference in the way that something like a repair or an addition can look. On the far right here, I have an example of what I would consider to be a fairly mediocre repair, where the texture is very different in different portions, and where the repair was done is pretty evident. And there's certainly an art to the application and matching of textures, and things might not always be completely invisible, but this is all done with fairly simple tools, trowels and sponges and brushes. So there can be a lot of very good texture matching, and that goes along with color matching as well. And this is somewhere where I will definitely not get into the specifics of guidelines, because I know there's a lot of colors that are specifically permissible in certain places and not others necessarily. I have here just the Rey Color Chart, which is one of the main companies that makes stuccos, and it's sort of used as a general like comparison baseline. And as I mentioned, the stucco sort of harkens back to mud plaster. So the earth tones are really what we see the most of, and often look for the most, because they fit with the look of Santa Fe, with that reference back to the adobe and the earth building. So those are going to be the most common, and then there's a few other kind of oddball ones, as well as the whites are also seen sometimes. And just going back to repairs and sort of matching things and adding additions, that these colors will change over time, even when they're applied. So there's fading, there'll be variability, and these pre-mixed colors are really much more of a guide than anything. Sometimes colors can be similar but mixed differently, just to get sort of a consistent color along a whole building. As I mentioned, the stucco is not a building type in and of itself. It can be applied on all sorts of different construction types. So most commonly you'll see it on adobe and on wood frame buildings. Those are some of the most common ones you might see, especially here. And an older adobe structure, for example, it would have not had stucco originally. It would have probably had a mud plaster if it's, say, a 200-year-old building. So that stucco would have been at some point in its history an attempt to keep that same look, but to reduce the maintenance time. Mud plaster needs maintenance most years, and stucco certainly lasts much longer than that. It has a much longer maintenance cycle. So on adobe in particular, the stucco became very popular because it meant that you did not have to be working on a building every year seasonally. And it works very well often, but it is a material that can hold water in against a surface, both on wood and on adobe. So it definitely needs some caution as it masks damage. If there's ever water infiltration, say from a roof, it can hide the problems until they're very large. Specifically about water, this was a project that the foundation undertook in 2014 to 15. It's on Alto Street, and in the middle is what the building looked like before any work, and there were significant cracks that indicated there was damage beneath. So when the stucco was removed, it revealed just whole cavities where the adobe had been washed away beneath. And that was because of failures of canales and old canales and some roof issues primarily, as well as an area below the window on the left side here, where that had been filled kind of improperly, partially with stone. And on the right, you can see where a whole corner was really missing. And no one knew that this damage was quite this extensive until it was uncovered. So it does present that that issue, that it can be very difficult to know without actually probing and exploring fairly regularly what stucco is hiding. But that said, with attention and with some maintenance and attention to drainage and water removal, it's a very long-lasting and low-maintenance material. Cracks are really the main indicator of an initial problem, and underlying causes of issues, mostly say roofs and rising damp. If those are addressed, then usually the stucco is absolutely fine for many years and does not require very much. And I will add as one additional note that the cement and elastomeric stuccos are somewhat dissimilar materials, so it's better to use like with like. The elastomeric is much more similar to a paint when it's applied over the cement, and paint itself is not really an appropriate material over stucco. It causes peeling and difficulties, and it's at least currently not permitted over any of the more significant properties, even for covering other paint like graffiti. So the two materials work fairly differently from each other, as well as working differently from, say, a lime plaster, which one sees very occasionally. So it's not as commonly noted here in historic districts. And that's sort of my general brief informative talk about stucco, and I'm happy to take some questions if people have them.
Mara, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the very informative, your very informative presentation. That is very helpful and very interesting as well. A couple of questions. Sometimes I see very smooth stucco, and sometimes I see stucco that has a lot of sand, that sand finish. Can you comment on these, the differences between these two in terms of durability?
Yes, so the very smoother finish is because it has a smaller aggregate, so any sand in it is a very small size versus, say, something closer to a pebble. And the smoother finish on an exterior is not quite as durable as a rougher finish. It tends to have more problems with surface cracking. It doesn't shed water as well. I think that is part of why you do not see it on the exterior quite as much as, say, a very smooth interior plaster finish.
And when more or less did the smooth type of plaster or stucco come into being? It seems like I'm seeing it more and more.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure when it officially really began. I also agree that it's a relatively recent occurrence. It's not something that I see in historic photos, certainly, but I can't really speak to the exact moment when it really started. Probably within the last couple of decades, though.
Mm-hmm. And as far as synthetic stucco, is it your observation that probably has improved throughout the years?
It has. There's definitely synthetic stucco, like say from the 90s, that was very plasticky and really almost came off in sheets when it failed. And it does certainly do better now.
Yeah, we had a long time ago, there was a person that came before the board, and and showed all these different properties within the historic district that primarily on the east side that had synthetic stucco. And when I looked at them, I really could not identify it as synthetic stucco. I was kind of shocked, but there it was. Another question, a quick question, I see other hands. I often see that in an adobe building that has stucco, I see people that plant right next to an adobe wall that has been stuccoed. And I often hear people say, oh, that shouldn't be done because water and adobe do not mix. Can you comment on that? But I see it all over the place and I see the plants thriving.
Well, yeah, it does happen a lot, and I think it depends a lot on what the planting is. If it's more like a native type of a species that doesn't require a lot of water, and if there's good drainage away from the building, so if things are kind of graded to shed water away, then I think it doesn't have to be a problem necessarily, but it's certainly something to watch for and make sure that there's no pooling at the base. And it's the sort of thing that might take a long time to really cause a serious issue. But if there ever is like a lot of water pooling at the base, it can undermine the adobe fairly quickly once it does.
Thank you. Member Katz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mara, do you have any sense of when stucco, cementitious type stucco was first used? Because I guess cement has been around for centuries.
I don't have an exact date for locally here. It's something I've been trying to chase down. I would say the earliest that I have seen real mention of it is in the 1930s or so. It's possible that there was a bit before then, but I don't know that it was common before that time period.
Well, thank you. My comment about the sand finish versus the smooth finish is that my stucco wall often attacks me and leaves me bleeding if I go too close to it and accidentally rub against it. So I kind of like the smooth finish, but I know it doesn't sound as durable. So I guess I'm glad I don't have it. Thanks.
Okay, Member Beachside.
Thank you, Mara. That was really informative. I wonder if you might be able to comment about time periods associated with different textures. Like the one that comes to mind that we've seen a few times is what I've heard referred to as brocade texture. Is that associated with any specific time period? And then I have a second question about the process for, we typically direct the use of cementitious stucco on contributing and significant buildings. If those have been treated with synthetic stucco, what is the process for restoring that?
Yes, so first a brocade stucco texture, it's a fairly heavily textured type of stucco, and I believe it's used throughout quite a few time periods. It's something that I would say is seen a lot in the 1950s and 60s at least, but probably earlier than that as well. And then in terms of the removal of, say, an inappropriate stucco, it usually means removing the substrate underneath it as well, realistically. So cutting down to the lath. It can sometimes come off sort of peeled away, but especially those older ones that I mentioned that really formed a sheet. But the general method for removing it would be to cut, say, with an electric saw, pieces out and peel them away from the substrate.
And just a follow-up, if a building is painted, is it correct that you can just lath over that and then apply cementitious stucco?
you can, it might undermine the material a bit if that paint fails, if there's water infiltration that gets in the layers. So it's, if the paint can be at all removed or roughed up and keep it from forming another seal in the middle, it is better in terms of longevity.
Thank you.
Member Guida.
Thank you, Chair Rios. And thank you, Carly and staff, for inviting Mara to do this. I really, really like this kind of education part of what we do, both for the benefit of the board and for the public. It's good for us to see this stuff, for it to be recorded, and hopefully be able to refer to it in the future. It's nice to get on the same page on some of this stuff. Mara, thank you for the fantastic presentation. I really, your discussion at the beginning about authenticity really resonated with me. I thought you very carefully described our curated Santa Fe style as an aspect of the 20th century, and how really cementitious stucco is a substitute for mud plaster that was historic and before it, and those fundamental differences of mud plaster over adobe being homogeneous, and cementitious stucco, although looking like that somewhat, or being an accepted substitute, being really about two different heterogeneous surfaces. And certainly that plays into, as increasingly as we go through time, as true adobe buildings become the minority, we see more of the stucco standing in for the older look. And I think it's an important thing to remember as we move forward in time, right? That we've kind of accepted some of, we could call it fakery, but we could call it acceptable substitutes to achieve this curated look. One of the things that struck me was the slide that made a kind of black and white opposition. There's been some comments about it here between synthetic stucco and cementitious, and certainly the polymer-based stuccos, have historically had a look. They may be getting better and so forth, but there was the distinction about what's allowed and what's not in the historic district. We think about like, oh well, cementitious stucco over adobe or over wood frame or sheathing or lath, that's one thing. And then EFIS, this thing that we all became familiar with in the 90s, is kind of really plasticky stucco over foam board. And I just want to kind of point out to the board that that is not so black and white anymore. And certainly as we move forward in time and are looking at tighter building codes, exterior insulation, whether it's foam or made out of more sustainable materials like mineral wool or wood products, will increasingly become part of code compliant remodels. And there are ways to do that similar to the kind of 90s EFIS system that look better, but there are also ways to attach a cementitious stucco over a continuous externally applied insulation. And so the current ban may be something that we kind of work towards reconsidering as we move forward in time, if that's acceptable as well. But as with all things, whether it's affordable housing or historic districts, we're always looking to kind of work in sustainability measures in an intelligent way.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Rita. I don't think any other board members, I don't see any of their hands up. I'll take it to public comment. And Stephanie, you have your hand up.
You must be reading my mind because I actually hadn't clicked the button yet, but I want to thank you, Mara, for the presentation. It was really quite good. And I just wonder about the idea that you could tell which mason did a particular building by the pattern in the stucco. I think it was Karen Heldmeyer, who did a lot of work on getting the Don Gaspar Historic Neighborhood declared, was I think said in like in the 40s that there were certain masons and you could tell by pattern. I'm wondering if you have any like information or archives on that. And then also I'm wondering about advocating for the use of some kind of water resistant layer like paper, waterproof paper between particularly adobe and cementatious stucco, or even the El Rey, not El Rey, but the elastomeric type of stucco.
Yeah, that's an interesting note about, really being able to tell who did something. That would be a calling card. And I think that that's something that it would be great to have more study on. I don't know that much about it specifically, but I can certainly see that, certain people doing things certain ways would have a certain finish, and they develop their own little method. And as for the waterproof layer, I actually have a specific experience with that from the last few years. This photo on my last slide is the entrance to El Ziguan. This is from the 1920s, and this courtyard wall is about twice as tall now, and there's a gate where the opening is. And in this photo, it is mud plastered. The building has at various times had a cement stucco on it. In 2014, the majority of the Canyon Road facade, so that's the side that we're seeing here, was done in a lime plaster, which is a more traditional type of a plaster. It's not a cement, it's a little bit of a more water permeable material that works really nicely with adobe because it lets kind of vapor escape in a way that cement doesn't. And this section in front of the courtyard has been a nonstop problem. I think because the top of the wall lets water sit on top of it. And we have pulled cement stucco off of it. We have pulled lime stucco off of it. We have put waterproofing membrane under stucco. We have sprayed a waterproofing layer over it at all at different times. And they just kept failing. And I found that the membrane actually traps a lot of water underneath it when we took that off. So I have some reservations about the use of that, because I think when water does get underneath it eventually, which water is wanted to do, it can be worse than if it had a way to ultimately escape. And this wall, if anyone would like to come see this, by the way, it's a great educational opportunity. We have now left this section as a mud plaster, and we are redoing it every year as an educational opportunity for interns and for the public to see. And the front of the building, the rest is that lime plaster, which is a bit of an experiment as it's pretty uncommon on exteriors here. And it is holding up very well. So getting back to that point of newer and alternative materials to consider, that is another one that I think would be great to see more of.
Thank you. I would say that in reference to textures, the different textures that have been used over time, that oftentimes I have noticed that they're used more in vernacular architecture, like the skiff trowel or any of those different patterns. I think that people kind of just invented them as they were plastering. So that was my little comment in terms of texture. And if nobody has anything further to say, Carly, shall we move on to the
windows
here?
Yes, Chair, the Windows presentation. So that is again Laura tonight.
And I believe I will have to stop sharing to switch presentations here. Oh, sorry, it switched me to the other one. There we go. So I don't think I need to introduce myself again, but I will add that the windows are my particular topic of choice. Before working for Historic Santa Fe Foundation, I spent 5 years working specifically on windows and occasionally doors, mostly in New England, and I work on them a fair bit for the foundation. So I will try not to be too long-winded on some of this. And I thought, first, let's start with a little overview of what different types of windows are. And probably the single most common two you'll see are these double hung. So those are the ones that slide up and down. And the casements, which are the ones that open like doors. And casements are a bit of an older technology. Double hung windows are a 19th century invention, really. And the portion of the window that moves in all of these is called the sash. And there are other newer kinds of moving windows. The horizontal sliding windows are more of a mid 20th century invention. Transom windows often don't move. Those are smaller windows that will be above a doorway. And they might tip open for ventilation, but they're usually not open. And I have sort of lumped everything else into another category, such as, say, a large inoperable picture window, or this photo is a glass block window, for example. There's definitely some different oddball versions of windows, but the casement and the double or single hung are what are most commonly seen. Double hung means that both the upper and the lower sash will move, and single hung means that only one does. Almost always that will be the lower sash. And they can be made out of a whole variety of materials. Wood is certainly the most traditional, and that's what pretty much all windows would have been made out of until about the 1880s. Whether they be double hungs like this one pictured, or casements. Steel windows were introduced by, they were invented in the 1880s. They didn't really become popular in places like New Mexico and the Western United States until after World War I. They were more of a European invention. This particular example is probably from the 1920s, and the two sets of panels on the left and right do operate on it. That's fairly common, that portions of the window will work and portions will be fixed. And then there's the vinyl, or more recently that's been kind of upgraded to a fiberglass, which is a bit more durable. Those were invented in the 1950s, sort of in response to the fact that we had cut down a lot of the old growth forests that were serving as building materials in the United States, and they were done as a cheaper and more accessible alternative. And they were followed up with the metal or vinyl clad wood, which is, the intent is to sort of be a protective barrier and a hybrid between the two. Those were introduced really in the 1960s, I believe. I think I preempted my slide here with the chronology, but just generally, really the earliest operable windows with glass, they were all casements. They would have hinged to the side. That's what you would have seen until really the mid 19th century, and then the double hungs become fairly common. And in the sort of mid 20th century, after World War I, and certainly after World War II, after World War II, there was a big shift toward things like vinyl windows. They were much cheaper. And as I said, we didn't have quite the quality of wood available anymore. And that is certainly a concern with modern wood windows, is that it's not easy to get quite the quality of wood, and they're a lot more prone to rotting than something from, say, 1850. And that that relates a lot to the sort of sustainability of historic windows, that they are made of this really incredible, dense, old growth wood. They've already proven that they can last 100, 200 or more years. And with some maintenance, I'm sure well beyond that. And the actual estimates from the companies making a lot of the replacement windows, they say 15 to 25 years. I've heard a few say 40 years maybe for the lifespan of their window before it needs to be fully replaced again. And if that's their own estimate, that's a bit optimistic. Sometimes it is less than that. So the act of replacing an old window really starts a cycle of waste. It sends all of these materials into a landfill. Almost all of them are not refillable or not recyclable or not recycled, even if they are. And it can be possible to have to replace, say, a set of vinyl windows even within a single homeowner's lifespan and time in a property. If a homeowner replaces the windows when they get a home and they live in it for 15 years, they may have to replace those all over again. So it is a big decision to take those old growth wood windows away. And the other side of sustainability that often comes up with windows is the insulation value of a single pane window versus the double and triple and now even quadruple pane windows now. And I will say that there's a lot of variables involved, but a single pane window has about an R value of 1, which is pretty low insulation. This is assuming it's in reasonable shape. But the double and triple pane windows have an R value of 2 or 3, which is also not that insulative. And the energy loss in a building through the windows is not huge. It's usually 15 to 20 or so % of it. So you're not getting a huge jump in terms of the insulation value by putting in replacement windows. Generally, the way that people feel a difference is that it's not where the glass is that there's energy transfer and temperature shift. It's if there are gaps around the sides of the windows. So where the sash are, if they're not closing properly, as air infiltration. So of course, if you put a brand new window in, it's got almost no gaps. They haven't shifted any. And that will feel like it is much warmer in the winter. And that is something that can definitely be addressed in older windows without fully replacing them. The repair and restoration of old windows is, there are certainly specialized parts, but quite a lot of it can be performed by a handy homeowner or a handyman. This photo on the top left is what a lot of old wood windows in ill repair look like. They're peeling paint and they look a little shoddy, but I will say that most of that is surface level damage. It is paint and it might be glazing putty. Glazing putty is the material that holds the glass panes in place, and that can deteriorate over time. And those things, I've taught many people how to fix both of those things in less than a day. The sash can be popped out and easily worked on to replace that putty and paint. And if there is wood rot, something called a Dutchman, which is what's seen on the lower left, can be done to replace just the portion that is rotted without replacing the entire window. And that's one of the big ways that these older windows differ from most of the newer replacement windows, especially something like a vinyl or a clad window. If they need to be replaced, you pretty much have to replace the whole window. They don't have removable parts that can be fitted in with new bits as needed. You can't cut a chunk of the vinyl out and patch in a new piece usually. You can do that with a wood window, though, fairly endlessly, really. And addressing the air infiltration that I mentioned, weather stripping is a really powerful tool that basically just means using a material to fill any gaps around the edges of the sash. It's usually metal or felt or foam or maybe a vinyl. And it can be as simple as something that is put in seasonally, say in the winter time when you want to seal up the gaps to keep it warm, or it can be for a number of years. The metal weather stripping, there's some that is many decades old that lasts just fine. And whatever material it is, it's basically just set in to close gaps up. This spring bronze shown on the left, for example, is just a sheet of bronze metal that's a little bit angled so that it presses up against the side of the sash. It actually makes it operate smoother, and it stops any air gaps from getting through. Same with in the middle, this interlocking weather strip is a slightly more intricate version. So there's different pieces of metal that fit in with each other when the window is closed and really seal everything up. And then on the right, I have just one of the versions of the simple temporary stick-on options like foam and felt that just fill in any gaps. And it's very easy for someone to just put their hand up to the window and feel where there's a gap and fill as needed. It doesn't really require any construction. There's no larger intervention involved. And it's definitely a factor to consider long before full replacement of a window. Another way that that the sustainability question can be addressed that I don't see actually very much in New Mexico, but I saw quite a lot when I worked in New England, is storm windows. It's basically just a single panel of additional glass that is placed over the existing window. It's basically a screen that you would put on when it's colder, when you wouldn't want to be opening the window. And they do not have to be the ugly metal things that I know a lot of people think of when they think of storm windows. This on the left was created for this particular window, and it's like largely invisible, honestly, and it fits this very unsquare opening, which is certainly a concern in a lot of Santa Fe, that we have a lot of wonky unsquare windows in the adobe buildings. And the interior storms are a relatively newer invention, maybe 25 or 30 years old, and it's basically just a plexiglass panel that just pops in and pops out as needed inside for an extra layer. They're totally invisible from the outside, and they're very easy to handle. They're lightweight. So either of these options are another way to add an extra air pocket that insulates a building and do so with very little visual interruption to the building. And it also, as an exterior storm, adds another layer of protection from weather to the actual older sash. So that's another benefit to them. So I think maybe I have revealed that I think there's almost never a reason to replace an older window. I would say something from before 1950, at least in terms of damage and decay and structural reasons. They can be repaired fairly endlessly. I will say when I worked in window restoration shops, we had people bring in windows that were literally in pieces, in boxes, and we put them back together and made them functional again. There's a lot that can be done. And again, if there's rot involved or if something is shifted a lot, there's individual pieces that can be replaced and repaired for a long ways before the whole window is completely unsalvageable. And There are, of course, times when a window might be taken out for other reasons, but structurally and integrity wise speaking, they can be saved for a very, very long time. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I will also say that a lot of what I got in terms of my resources came from the Window Preservation Alliance, which is a great source of lots of information about old windows, and I really recommend them.
Well, Mara, thank you very much for this presentation. I can see that you're definitely an advocate of saving old wood windows. There has been a debate on the cost of repairing windows as opposed to replacing them. Can you comment on that?
I will say one issue in Santa Fe is that there just are not a huge number of people who specialize in older windows. So I think that is an issue with the repair of them. And I personally am working on educating more people on how they can do a lot of these repairs themselves and hosting workshops and such. The restoration of an older window, though, usually does not need to be any more costly than a replacement window. Most repairs can be done for a few $100s per window. It's only when there's very intense intervention that it gets to be more than that.
Oh, okay. I do have to say that though she's not here this evening, Flynn Larson, one of our board members, has echoed many of the things that you have indicated tonight. She's a big advocate of saving wood windows and has talked to us about energy efficiency and talked to us about, discarding things, and then they're taken to the dump, and it's really better to try our best to save those old windows. Thank you. Daniel, you have your hand up. What do you have?
Yes, thank you. My name is Daniel Schwab. I'm one of the senior planners, so I work a lot with applicants. I have 3 questions that have come to mind. One is if you could speak about wood warping and to what degree that can be corrected. The second has to do with removing paint on windows that have been sealed, painted shut, and not moved for maybe decades. What kind of problems that poses. And the third is what possibilities there are for repairing steel casement windows.
Sure. So first, for the warping, I will say that is one of the trickier things to repair on an older window for sure. And that would probably be one of the cases where you would cut away what is warped and replace pieces. You get into strange geometry sometimes when the warping happens, and that can be reduced by keeping a good coat of paint on top of the window, even if it's the full repairs underneath that paint are not always addressed. The warping happens much more when water and sunlight can attack the wood directly. So that would be a preventative measure for that. And then, sorry, what was the second point? I think I got lost in there.
Second point was what possibilities are there for, or what problems are posed by windows that have been painted shut for long periods?
Sure. So windows that are painted shut, honestly, I find them kind of fun to fix because it's relatively easy. You usually really only have to go in and cut that paint, which is messy. Use a good blade and maybe tap a putty knife in there. It's kind of a double-edged sword because it can help protect a window from the warping and damage that happens when it can move. but it's not actually particularly dangerous for the window's integrity, really, to be painted shut. It is definitely a nuisance and an issue, but paint, if it's really layered on, can just be cut away, and then further paint jobs to clean that up. It's better to do so when it's not in place and to pop the window out, but in terms of not sticking it in place. But it's also possible to fix those even in the moment by just cutting the single paint line. And then for steel windows, they are definitely a different skill set from the wood windows. There's maybe more machinery involved. With wood windows, very much can be done with hand tools and very simple things. But they're very durable. They last a long time, and they're very fixable as well.
Okay,
Sorry, you were saying.
maybe I could just respond or ask for an additional comment, because my experience, and it may be completely wrong, is that we have a fair number of steel windows in Santa Fe dating back to the 1950s, 60s. There doesn't seem to be any expertise locally for repairing them. And we almost, what my experience is that we frequently allow them to be replaced because repair appears to not be possible, either because lack of skill or technology or cost. I'm not sure.
I will agree with you there. Locally speaking, I think there's really a lack of experience in steel windows. I mean, I have a bit of experience, but I am certainly much more experienced with wood windows. And I know that it is quite possible to repair them, but there's certainly the extra burden of figuring out how even to do so without really having qualified craftsmen to do the work here.
Anything else, Daniel?
Well, just maybe in the future, maybe it's possible to be put in contact with if there are specialists that deal with steel windows in particular, so that we have someone to refer to.
I would be happy to pull some contacts together and make some connections. I know people who specialize in steel windows in other parts of the country. So it would be great to maybe be able to get them down here and if not expand their range, then at least perhaps offer some education and training.
Thank you. I'm going to take it to public comment in reference to windows, if anybody from the public wants to comment. And we have, we have several people. I'll go to John Eddy. He's already been sworn in. John?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for bringing in Mara for this. It's been really great, and I hope that the public can access this Zoom recording and appreciate the expertise that she's brought to share with you. So thank you again for doing that. I wanted to share a couple of anecdotal stories vis-a-vis the ethics of preservation and kind of the benefits sometimes. Mara is very strong adherent to maintaining what is historic, and certainly there are ethics in doing a proper historic preservation project where there are guidelines, going back to a word that was discussed earlier, in that only pieces of rot should be removed from an existing historic window where possible. And there are kind of cutoff points on that. Some windows are so far gone that they obviously can't be saved, but as Mara has stated, very often, 9 times out of 10, they can be saved with replacing Dutchman and such. We were working on a house on Camino Escondido years ago, and a lot of what we have here, you have it everywhere, is shifting foundations. because a lot of the vernacular foundations were basically river rock or rough squared rock built up into foundations, and they were not poured concrete foundations like we have now. So you have a lot of shifting substrate. And what that will do in a lot of cases is pull the windows out of square. So we were working on an historic house over there, and we stuck to the rules, and we pulled the sashes out and replaced wrought as necessary, and replaced them back in the existing window frames. Now the window frames, there wasn't a 90-degree angle anywhere on this property. There was nothing plumb anywhere in this property, or nothing level anywhere in this property. And this window was a pretty classic example of that. And the owner who lived elsewhere came to check on the project, and he looked at it at the window. He says, "What's wrong with that window?" And I said, "Oh, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, it's all crooked." I said, "Yeah, it's been crooked for 30 years. They said, "Well, how come it's not straight?" And I said, "Well, if we straighten the window overly, we undermine the historic character of this house." And these houses, Maura used one of my favorite words, these houses are wonky, and they show their wonkiness, and it enhances the information that they give us that they're historical. If you overly square things up, you take that away. A couple of years later, we were doing a house on Palace, rehabbing. It was a vernacular house. And it's really interesting because some of the windows had been replaced by cheapo factory sashes from Furrows. Furrows building materials used to be our go-to place for affordable materials. And they were really, really horrible. And we decided, well, we got to do these. We're just going to have to do these windows. These are terrible. And as it turned out, the owner, who was a previous director at HSFF, was out wandering in the arroyo above the house, and she found the original windows up in the arroyo. So we dragged the original windows back down to the house and completely rehabbed them, put them back in the house, and we were good to go. So anyway, thank you for indulging me. But there are pleasant things that come out of trying to do the right thing sometimes. It's not always just a burden.
Thank you, John. Appreciate your stories. We have another person from the public, and I do not know how to pronounce the last name. The first name is Chris, and the last name is spelled T-S-A-Y. And Carly, do we have to swear in this person?
Madam Chair, I don't think so, but that's a good question for Melissa.
I think so. Frank Rubeli, are you still with us?
I am, and if no decision is going to be made on this person's input, I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, thank you. Chris, are you there?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes, and what is your last name? How is your last name pronounced?
Ty.
Oh, Ty. Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad I didn't even make a stab.
Story of my life.
Ty, yes, we will hear your comments.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering what Mara's opinion was if you were already on the treadmill of like replacement wood windows that are starting to fail that were installed in like the 70s or 80s. Like, is that something which you would think, yeah, try and repair it, or is it just time to rip out those things and put in new windows?
This is Mara. They very well might be repairable for a number of cycles. I will not completely throw out something that would be that new. And if they do get to a point where they just really don't seem replaceable anymore, I will make a point for fitting some salvage windows into openings. It can certainly be done, and they get ripped out of buildings all the time. I wish there were more people keeping those salvage windows locally here. But they're without looking at them specifically, there's certainly a lot that can be done for even a newer wood window. But yeah, it is sort of an unfortunate cycle sometimes to get into because they do hit a lifespan.
Yeah, and they're not historic anymore. So how much effort really is going to be, do you want to put into them? And I also had one last question. How do you guys deal with the intersection of like modern egress standards and old windows?
Yeah, that might be a better question for Carly.
Thank you, Mara, Madam Chair. So it depends if there is an egress issue. If there is an alternate, first we look at the status of the structure, and then we look at is there an alternate path of egress. If the windows need to be repaired, then we don't that doesn't trigger egress, us looking at egress. What it's a permittable project. And that would trigger us to look at egress first. And then we would try for an alternate path of egress. And then from there, we'd look at specifically the specific site and location of the window and all of that. I know that doesn't answer things fully, but we really avoid changing that historic material as much as possible.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I guess like all things, it's very, very application specific.
Yes.
Thank you.
It really is case by case, I would say, and Carly is correct. We really try hard to keep what is historic, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Something that comes to mind in reference to windows is a comment that was made fairly recently, and that was in reference to the remodeling of Manderfield, what used to be Manderfield School, and it's now Manderfield condominiums or townhouses. And the applicant, I think the board was pushing for the applicant to restore, to repair the wood windows there from the school. And I guess the argument was presented to us and it was strong enough where the board allowed the applicant to go ahead and totally replace all windows with the same pattern, in kind. But I guess when you say in kind, you try to get as close as possible to the historic window. But as Mara just stated, there is a difference between, and this is what Flynn has also been telling us, between the wood of old and the wood that is being manufactured now. But let's see, Member Benvenue.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. So yeah, thank you again, Mara, for your presentations. Both were very helpful and informative. I mean, just a couple almost random thoughts here on the steel windows, steel frame windows. That's one of the areas where ever since I've been in Santa Fe, it's been sort of used as an example of how the H-board, exalts form over substance and requiring people to keep those windows when they want to replace them with modern insulated glass, etc., that are were claimed to be so much more energy efficient. And I'm just wondering if you were addressing that with respect to the wood frames. That there actually isn't that significant of a difference. Is that true with the steel windows as well? Either just technically by measurement or by the sense that an occupant might have that they feel more uncomfortable in the wintertime close to the steel frame windows?
Yeah, so with steel frame windows, I will say in terms of actual data, there really isn't as much as there is with wood windows. There's already not that many studies of older wood windows. There's a lot more industry money in the replacement windows to talk about those. But in terms of my sense, that when they're in good repair, steel windows can be not very cold, but they are definitely colder than the wood windows. Just the steel material itself is allows a lot of heat transfer in a way that wood doesn't, and it doesn't have the same level of issue of air infiltration around edges because that they either are not operable or they operate differently. They're like a cranked casement window, so they seal in a different way. But any sort of feeling of cold inside from them is a lot more just because the steel itself tends to get colder. So it's still not, it's not about the glass as much, but the material of the window is chillier. So it's maybe more of a concern with them than it is with the wood windows.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I expected. I mean, I know that's how people feel. I just wasn't sure if that was actually demonstrable or not. But you still are making the argument that, well, of course, we have the historic appearance that is created by the steel frame for certain eras, as well as the sustainability issues that still would advocate in favor of retaining the steel windows. So
I do advocate, and I would say storm windows are again another thing to consider with the steel windows, especially those interior storm windows. They work really well with those metal sash, and they're not very intrusive at all, and not terribly expensive. They're generally cheaper than the exterior ones.
yeah, I exactly did that solution on a historic building on Paseo Territorial. You just put in, have the steel windows that could not be changed, but by putting in interior glass, created both insulation as well as sound insulation from Paseo, which was very effective, and it didn't change the exterior appearance at all. So I do agree that's an option. Also on the windows, do you have any view on true divided lights versus the false divided lights that we tend to see a lot of? Obviously, this comes up, it's more of an aesthetic issue, I think, than anything, but I'm just wondering if you, as a preservationist, have any view on whether or not you would consider it acceptable to be replacing historic true divided lights with false divided lights.
My personal opinion is that no, the false divided lights are terrible, and once you know what they look like, you cannot unsee it. It really stands out very much in terms of the integrity and of streetscape and of what a building looks like to put those stick-on false divided lights on in place of what was a true divided light. The way that the light bounces off of the panes is different, and the actual, you can see a material difference. And just in terms of integrity of material of buildings and sort of honesty of material, that I have an issue with the idea of this sort of false past. If you're going to replace something to make it look fake old, versus being honest about the changes. This is very much opinion and aesthetic, but I think that is it undermines the truly older and truly historic aspects of the city as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I agree. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Benvenu. Let's see, John Eddie has his hand up. John, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Say, Madam Chair, I had a question, and I wanted to just throw some feedback as well. The modern construction of the county courthouse building on Catherine Street and that area across from the Civic Center. There's an example of fake divided light architectural design on that building, which is it's pretty egregious, I think, and anybody that's looking at it knows exactly what it is. I was going to ask, as a resource for the previous caller, is the Rios family still doing salvage? Do they still have a salvage yard where you can go buy materials that have been taken out of old buildings?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Not to try to create business for you folks, but I thought he might want to track that down. That used to be our go-to in the hippie vernacular building boom of the 70s. Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, Carly, I will turn it over to you now.
Okay, so I'm going to do a brief run through of the draft Stucco guidelines. And these are drafts, so they are up for comment. And then later, we will do further editing and then bring back to a board hearing for adoption once they're ready. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share a screen. Kind of piggybacking off of the earlier presentation, we thought this would go well together. The stucco, there are different varieties of stucco here in Santa Fe that are pretty important. The Santa Fe Railroad Depot has that nice pebble texture. We have that. The fan texture down near Canyon Road and Delgado. There's our particular garage. But so textures are really important. Materials are very important, and applications really important, as we heard some about earlier tonight. So we do a fair amount of stucco administrative approvals, and then stucco restuccoing comes into play with our board cases. I think the most the thing we end up focusing on very much are colors, and I think that's an extremely important factor in the historic district. So we wanted to have first the guidance document that acknowledges those textures, that outlines the materials, and that clearly states that synthetic stucco is permissible on non-contributing and new construction. That's the way we're operating now. We want to make sure we avoid situations where synthetic stucco would end up on a significant or contributing building. And paint. We want to acknowledge paint on cement stucco because it happens. It happens, unfortunately, to cover graffiti, because I think folks want to cover graffiti very quickly, and that's usually the go-to. And so we want to have this guidance out there. Also, while there are other sections in the code on graffiti, so we don't specifically put that in here. But I think I'm open to. I think it's open to comment on that. But we just want to make sure we don't conflict with other portions of the code. Colors specifically. Now we have another document here that has the colors highlighted. This is generally what we've been generally operating on within HPD, maybe for the last year and a half, is my understanding. But a lot of this has been definitely geared towards downtown and east side. Now, so these are some of the starred colors that we generally find acceptable. I think, the big questions are for downtown and east side or all of the historic districts. If we parse it down by all of the historic districts, then that's going to need more study and more time. It can be done, but it doesn't give an overall guideline that I find is just a necessary fact of the way we run HPD logistically, putting out information, making sure it's clear. If these are the overall colors that we generally find acceptable for all of the H districts, or we want to broaden it slightly, this is a good time to have some of that conversation. That said, I know Cottonwood for the downtown east side especially is considered too green. And let's see, I've got just a couple other notes here. That's really it as far as I have. I sent this document out in advance, and it's really just an opportunity to have a discussion and a moment to comment, and to keep in mind that this document is really meant to help applicants move their projects forward more cleanly and quickly.
Yeah, board members, do you have any comments in reference to Carly's presentation? Member Katz.
And that was very helpful. Did you send this draft to us, Carly?
It is in your packets.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And we will have another presentation of a final draft. So if you see other items that don't get discussed in this time frame, then I think we'll have another opportunity to see another draft.
Yeah, when we have something such as this, you have all these names of the different colors. For me, and I'm sure for other board members, it's better to see them in person. If you can really see them from, so that, yeah, we have a color chart, but how true is the color chart to the actual color that will go on?
This is a good question, Madam Chair, and members of the board. It's because I know that working with doing work with I was on a project with Color Desert Rose, and it came out differently one time. They can come out slightly differently. So I think that we've got a note in here that while these are the Del Rey colors, they are good general color guidelines, because once you get a color sample, sometimes it's the mine or however the color is made. If it's mined material, then it depending on what vein they get into, it could be slightly different. And maybe our inspector Gary can speak a little bit more on this. He's got his hand up.
Yeah, because some of the, you have, when I think of in particular the east side, I think of earth tones, but they also have, some of these earth tones have a lot of yellow in them. Some of them have like sandstone kind of orangey. They have different colors. And I'll tell you, I think in my opinion that we, being whoever we is, did a disservice to the West Side Guadalupe Historic District, because that district had a lot of color. They had pink houses and yellow houses and orange houses, and when I was growing up, and all colors of different houses. But now the West Side Historic District is trying to replicate what's on the east side. And as we know, like for instance, the Don Gaspar area, that has a lot of, it's an eclectic style of homes because you have ranch houses. You might have a Victorian house. I can't think of any Queen Anne homes there, but you have different style homes. You have pitched roofs. You have brick buildings. You have shingles on the roof, that type of thing. But I really do think that even, I'm going to tell you, even on the east side, houses were actually painted. Yes, painted different colors. It wasn't stucco, they were painted. And then eventually they all became earth tone colors. But I remember houses being different colors, even on the east side. So interestingly enough, in reference to colors, I just think that we have to kind of study them a little bit more. And if Gary can kind of talk to us, he has his hand up about this, Gary.
I'd just like to make a comment on the listing of colors. I think the listing that you have is cementitious from Al Ray. I noticed that when I was doing administrative approvals before for stucco, the Stowe colors were different, named differently. So I think if we have a listing of for Stowe, I think we can throw that in there as well. But
That's
yeah,
a good idea.
yeah. So we can do that because there's different names for it. And then I see like different colors. I've noticed that when I've done inspections, is that I noticed some white that's been going on once in a while. And sometimes there were administrative approvals and sometimes they were approved by the board. So it's kind of confusing when people ask what color is really approved and they'll use it. And then sometimes you have these colors that aren't even approved or didn't even get a permit for it. So people just throw that in there and it's kind of hard to enforce when exactly for me, if I don't know which colors are really approved. And sometimes it changes through directors and leadership from land use and through the historic preservation divisions. So it's kind of like we have to be consistent on colors, just to keep that in mind.
Oh, thank you, Gary. Any other questions or comments, board members, in reference to colors? Let me, Member Beachside.
Thank you. Just a couple of things that you might consider in the final draft. One is maybe some guidance on, I think it's possible sometimes an applicant may present a color that they've found to be historic in their house when they would sort of take off the layers of stucco. You know, it might be pink or something like that. Like, how do we treat cases like that, where it's not maybe one of these approved colors, but seems original to the house, or that sort of situation. And then with respect to, I think the code actually does talk about the use of multiple colors on a single building, like prohibiting that except for under the portal. But we have had cases where multiple buildings on a property were stuccoed in different colors. And some guidance on that would be helpful to avoid like the East Alameda project in the future.
So to clarify, multiple buildings on the same property, but of different colors.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Not one building, multiple colors.
Right.
Oh.
Right. I think the code says something about, you know, the stucco on one building has to be the same color.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know if it addresses
yeah,
different buildings. And I'm not saying those has to be all the same either, just some guidance on what we should consider there.
anything further?
Oh, thanks.
Member Benvenu?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. It's actually, I was just going to ask about that East Alameda project. I've always wondered, it must have been approved before my time, but not only is it different colors, I'm talking about 535 East Alameda, but it looks like a white color. And I've always wondered whether or not that was approved as an exception or if that was considered to be an acceptable color, because it's certainly not an earth tone.
That was approved by staff.
I can answer a little bit on this too, because I asked this question as well. And this, the color swatch that was given, and the actual product ended up being quite different. This is one of those, or different enough to where visually it looked like something approvable. And then once it got applied, there was a difference. And this is something where maybe we need on things on stuccos that are a little bit more borderline, that maybe a sample has to be provided, especially on specific buildings. So let me look into that too.
Yeah, and that was approved by staff.
That is correct.
Yeah. So let me
Okay,
see.
thank you. Actually, if I could, just one additional question for Gary. So I've been curious about the inspection process. I've always assumed that when we approve a project that it includes, even though we don't make a specific finding, whatever was specified within the application, and that almost always specifies a specific stucco color. And if it doesn't, we usually require it to specify something. So I've always assumed that the inspection process of ensuring compliance with the approval and any conditions on the approval would include just verifying that the stucco color was the one that was specified in the application. But I don't know if that's actually the case or if that's even doable. So I'd appreciate any clarification on how that works.
Gary?
Usually when I come down to it, it'll be at the final inspection. There's sometimes when the stucco color is not there. It's kind of hard, and I just go with what's there. And if it's the stucco color not there, then I go ahead and approve it. As long as I know if it's one of the earth tone colors, then I just go ahead and approve it. But I think when it comes down to the ultimate is the approval, the request letter that comes in first, and it's up to the case planner to go ahead and write that in there and make sure that it's there. That way, when I do the plan review, I'll make sure the color matches there on the plans that are submitted for permit and what was approved by the H board or the staff. So, and the other thing is that when we do administrative approvals, if they're not using metal lath, they're not required a permit. And then it's kind of hard to do a final inspection on those stucco application because there's no permit tracking it. So it's hard to do an inspection on that as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you. Anything?
Madam Chair, could I just make one more,
absolutely.
ask one more question?
No, you have
that just on the inspection, it just occurred to me another question I've had, and that is, this relates to stucco, but maybe it's a different issue, and that is the radius of the corners. That's the issue that often comes before us. We ask about it frequently. Sometimes it's specified. And then, that can be a very important part of the approval process in many of these cases. And I've wondered if we should also have a policy that addresses the radiuses so that we have some consistency in that regard and don't have to do it ad hoc on an application by application basis.
Yeah, sometimes I see that as well. Sometimes like it's mentioned in the conditions, and it's rare that I see it. And if it's not there, and if I don't know about it, then I'm just letting it go. But I do see it once in a while. So, yeah.
Oh, so maybe, not maybe, we need to be more specific and actually include that. If something's going to be rounded, if it's going to be sharp, and indicate the radius, that would be very helpful. Probably
Correct.
Gary, he can go through that checklist.
Yeah, correctly. And then, it's like you may have made it a condition, but it's up to the case planner to finalize it in the H board letter. So if it's not in there, then I will not look for it. So it's got to be specific. And like I said, it's everybody's got to be consistent on it. If the case planner does not put it in there on their final report, the H board action letter, then I'm not going to look for it. Certain stuff like issues of window setbacks as well, you know, if you wanted bullnose and all that stuff, just pretty much little things like that. If it's not there, I'm not going to look for it. If it's there, then I'll look for it. So if it's specific, yes, I will look for it.
Okay, so Carly, I wonder if you could address what your view is on the extent to which the board should be, well, a couple of things. Should we have a policy guidelines, number one? Number two, if not, should the board be making a special effort to address that in every application, which seems somewhat onerous?
So, Madam Chair and Member Bienvenue, it's a good question because it depends on I think it very much depends on the application. There are certain architects that will put their radius in the corner and put that in the drawings. And then in some occurrences, then it's a requirement by the board. And so those are two different things. And I guess my question is, are you looking for guidelines to when and where to require it?
It seems to me it should be required and something that would be inspected in every case, because the radius is, it's always called out to some extent on the drawing. Although the CAD drawings often look like sharp corners, and then the architect will usually explain, well, that's just because I can't get this round corners, but they'll be rounded. And then we have the difficult issue of trying to decide, well, should we be more specific than that, or is that sufficient? And I'm getting a feeling that we often just feel like, well, that was satisfactory that we heard it would be rounded, but I'm not sure that ever got translated and conveyed to Gary to know whether or not that's something he should even be looking at. And so he might approve something that's not rounded at all because it hasn't been called out to him.
Okay, so let me answer it this way, I think. If the corners are rounded and they're proposed as rounded in the drawings, that should be in the drawings for certain. Now, if it's a requirement of the board, let's say there's an addition to a contributing building and it's not evident, then it's being specific is very, very good in that case, yes.
Okay.
Now, a new builds, adding that requirement on new builds, I think would be, depending on, what and where it is questionable. And that's where I think it likely needs to be case by case based on the reading of our code, but it's also part of. Go ahead.
And if just for my own benefit, if it were to be case by case and we felt it was important in a specific application as a condition of approval that they be, I'm using the generic term rounded now, should we be calling out a specific radius so that gets put by the case planner into the document that Gary would be reviewing to check?
I can answer that, Carly.
Yeah.
I think as long as it's rounded over, you don't have to specify the radius, because I'm not going to measure the radius. As long as it's called for rounded corners, then I'll look for the rounded corners. Like some architects do have these, their way of doing just square pointed corners. But if it's called out, I'll look for it. So as long as you say it's rounded corners, then I'll go ahead and do that.
Thank you, Gary.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything further, Member Benvenu?
No, thank you.
Member Guida?
Thank you. I would favor the case-by-case approach for this, I mean, both for new buildings and for additions and for the varying conditions that we encounter on existing buildings with how their windows are inset. I think it highlights, the importance of the application drawings. If not drawing it specifically, then clearly communicating the intent, and the board seeing that. I agree. I don't want to get into 2 inches versus 3 inch radius and stuff like that. But it's a fundamental design detail, and it varies so much that making a hard and fast rule seems really difficult to do.
Thank you, Member Brita. Attorney Rubelit.
I'm wondering if there are some just kind of industry standards that can be referred to, say in the vernacular, like something came up, I think, on the 1023 Alameda project, that they agreed to bull-nosed corners. What's bull-nosed? Does everybody understand what that means? Because I wasn't sure.
It just means rounded.
Yeah, just a rounded corner.
But is
Rounded,
there
anything rounded?
Okay, I mean, it seems to me like I've seen some construction going on where there was some manufactured, very much like you would put a square corner in some houses. There were these rounded corners that were going in that were then plastered over, or is there some kind of industry reference to those standard building materials that result in rounded corners? I mean, I don't know, and probably Member Roybal would have been in the best position to answer that, but maybe we could ask some people that do construction, or Gary, maybe are there some standard rounded corners that are readily available that can be referred to by their industry names?
Not really anything like standardly out there. Pretty much every contractor and construction, they pretty know it by bullnose. There's no really standards of it, so I can look into it some more and see if there's anything in the ICC and the ICC codes for residential. I can look into it and see.
There are none. There are none in the codes.
Yeah, that's what I kind of thought.
Bullnose comes in different sizes, and we're back at the same point as we were at.
Yeah, and that's kind of like, yeah, it's gonna be like kind of nitpicking about it. So yeah.
But the different sizes are referred to in inches, like a 2 inch rounded corner, or a 3 inch bullnose, 2 inch bullnose, that sort of thing.
Yeah, but I've seen that before. So
It may be helpful to just have a line that states the intent, like to the intent of rounded versus square corners to be included. That may be a way
That's a
forward.
good idea.
yeah,
There have been
that'll make
attorneys,
sense.
I mean, architects that have come before us that do indicate the radius. But we usually just ask, will you be rounding the corners, or, depending on what is being presented, or is that going to be a square? Is that going to be a sharp corner? But anyway, okay, let's see if anybody from the audience wants to comment. I think John Eddy. John.
I accidentally muted him after he unmuted.
Am I good now?
Yes, go
Okay,
ahead, John.
thank you. I know everybody they're already
Yeah.
home. They want to get to bed. I wonder if a way to help clarify this is to try to attach a trigger to the architectural design standard that the builders and the architects are claiming to adhere to. Obviously, Spanish Pueblo revival style is a heavy bullnose, the size of a bull's nose, and that's why it's called a bullnose, in my understanding of things.
Mhm.
So if you're claiming to build a territorial style building, I would assume that this board would not want to force anyone to put wide bullnoses on their corners, because territorial corners are usually pretty sharp. So I think trying to get this linked to the style that the builder is trying to adhere to or claiming to adhere to might be a way to bring some clarity to this.
Yeah, thank you for your comments, Mr. Eddie. Anything further? Put up here, he left us. Okay, Carly, anything else?
Trying to unmute. That is all for this evening. Or at least from this presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, everyone that presented tonight. And of course, thank you, board members. Any matters from the board? Good, I don't see any hands up. Our next meeting will be January the 25th, 2022. I thought I was going to have to tell you, Frank, that you were going to have to pretty soon chair, because I was going to have a hip replacement, but they told me, no, that has all elective surgeries are now postponed due to that surge in, you know what, the big C, COVID, not the other big C. So anyway, well, everybody, thank you very much. We are now adjourned and it is 9:27. Good evening. And we'll see you later on in January.
Thank you.
Adios.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye. Bye, Gary. Nice to see you.